allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, now we want to consider approval of the agenda. In the case of an emergency, items may be added to the agenda by the majority vote of the board of directors. An emergency is defined as a work stoppage, a crippling disaster, or other activity that severely imperils public health, safety, or both. Items on the agenda may be taken out of potential order as authorities determined by the board of directors. The board may take action on any items during the agenda. Approval.
I second it.
I have a motion by Goodsell and a second by Proctor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Yes, so we've got Rick, who's going to give you guys an update on where we're at with the ambulatory surgical center and that situation, so.
So I'm Rick Buxholm. I'm a consultant for working with 5 years now for IVHD. For a number of years, assisting with strategy for physician ambulatory services. Also helping with one of the things we've worked on for the past almost a year and a half now is the strategy, the GI strategy in the area. And one of the things we completed early at the end of last year was the acquisition of a portion of a surgery center down in South Central. Give you a little background why we did that and where it's going to still have other items to address with regards to the acquisition of the land building. This big process. I'm going to give you 10 minutes of the background, where we are, and what we're doing. So really, the GI care in the area. The reason we actually have this at the table and we met with Dr. Suleiman, Dr. Elman, is because 3 of the 4 larger performers of GI services are relatively old. And they're going to retire in the next 2 to 5 years. We've had a very difficult time recruiting. We wanted to align all the GI services in the community, work together to get into that service. Services right now, Valley and Knox doing about 6,000 cases a year. So it really does be performed by Dr. Elman and Dr. Suleiman, both I think 68 and 70 years old. We don't have the capacity at our hospitals to absorb 6,000 cases. It would swamp us. So what we thought was at the time it was best to joint venture and work with them to support them and recruit and retain them. So the other people that we have, other than Dr. Elman and Suleiman, is Dr. Hamdi, who was actually announced to return already about a week ago. And then we have Dr. Sweet at Pioneers, who is a family practice who does scoping. And then we have Dr. Lopez in the center. With 180,000 person population, we can support a significant amount more than what we currently have in the back. So, all coverage historically was 500 for weekdays and 1,000 per week. This is really needed because general surgeons in the area generally don't do much endoscopy work, and a lot of other places general surgeons do. So we need a larger presence of GI service. The other thing we want to do is really us to support the center for Dr. Sweet and now Dr. Suleiman after we did the acquisition of things. that's kind of the background of where we are. The goal here was to preserve services in the local area. The area can support these 3 new productive GI people on top of what we have based on population. However, based on physicians working in the area without support of IVHD in the hospitals, recruiting is very difficult. This is a very high Medi-Cal. It just doesn't really, the volumes they perform at really don't attract GIs to the area unless there's some practice support. That's exactly what Dr. Silver and Dr. We really need to partner. So for us to actually recruit people, we need to have a recruitment office would be income guarantee for a couple of years. Another sweetener is the ability to buy into an ambulatory surgery center, and then potentially call pay if we're taking above 7 days of call. We'll get to that. Without actually with us in the future as part of this, GI services will continue to be limited in here. Probably endo center. I don't know if much of you guys know anything about it. I'll give you a background. It was owned 50-50 by the 2 GNIs. It's located 2 miles from South Central Regional. They're 674 and 68 that currently own it. They had no current plan. We were talking to them to recruit GIs to replace them. They retired because they were just having a very difficult time. Now we've actually had some breakthroughs and getting some people interested. Each GI was a solo practitioner, and the center at that time was thinking about roughly about $600,000 a year profit. Split by the time. The ASC is about 16 years old, set up as an 1120 professional corporation, and the medical equipment is mostly depreciated. They do buy pretty good new scopes and keep those up. We did have an inspector come through, 2 inspectors. We had a IVHD inspector come through, examine that to make sure that they're operating to standards that we want to be part of, and they are. So they're doing a really great job. So at that point, we want to have that relationship with them. In their transaction goals and milestones, where we wanted a relationship with them that was collaborative and aligned all of our incentives. So we really based that on the success of the joint venture. It's still really the bulk of it on their shoulders. We ended up buying 20%. We'll get into that in a minute, for us to be able to have a pathway forward, because we don't want to go too much at risk without having them invest. Going in and buying 100% of the center would take all of the risk away from them, and then generally there's no aligned incentive for things to fail. So we're taking baby steps in this relationship. Slide number 7 with that. It's kind of the assumptions we used. Another reason why we did this is the issue that we have to kind of address as part of our decision to buy this is how fast will new entities replace volume through 2 current entities. And our assumption is we use various scenarios of how to get them on to speed and how to do that. But we currently at any moment have about 500 to 700 people screening colonoscopies at any time. It's just a huge backlog. Can the market support volume of over 8,400 procedures? We believe that they're currently doing 6,000 down there in the marketplace based on population. We want to get over 10,000 procedures. So we're still underserved in this area and seeing a lot of people go out of town. How much collections procedure increases IVHD or owner built? 0. And really, because we're buying a small percentage, they can have access to our rates. We cannot negotiate for them. It's only over 50%. But sitting at the table maybe help them out in the future. So we got modeled that we just kind of went along just how they have. Surprisingly, we did a rate analysis. They did, whoever did their negotiation did a pretty good job of getting decent rates. So they're not bad shares. What is a reasonable match? Roughly management fees range anywhere from 6 to 12%. We assume 8% management fee for the physician to continue managing. And what's the likely CapEx need over the next 5 to 10 years? And we figured it's about 120% of the current equipment expense. But then we'll constantly have to replace new equipment, new scopes, things age out, medical equipment needs to be replaced. And then to develop a purchase price, we actually use a very high discount rate. So 22% as the physicians themselves do all the work, and they're both very old. Older, not very old. Not this way, Matt, I take that. They're both older, they're further along in their career. So our goal was to obtain a leadership role in the GI care in all settings by an integrated approach. I think we've achieved that. Dr. Solomon and Lee, who used to outcomes pioneers, are now both Solomon is practicing here, doing cases back at the hospital. Lee's privileges should be finalized this month, and they'll all be taking call, which they have not done in many years. So we're seeing a much more collaborative, beneficial approach to care. We wanted to, we want to manage medical conditions, take advantage of our 340B. We really kind of have lost some of that over the years. We're getting that back with the Dr. Solomon practice, Dr. School's secondary education, the local providers. We lost a few years ago. Going to GI endoscopy lab, used mostly by GIs and other procedurals. That's kind of what we did. And then handle all patient GI needs locally instead of transferring. We transfer a lot of patients now because of the lack of people, lack of call, lack to take care of those patients. We're seeing a change in that pattern. This is doctor on the week, school and stuff. So really our goal was to kind of grow procedural volume, reduce GI call coverage. All of our contracts that we're doing now, we're looking at including call, a certain amount of days of call in the contracts. And everybody's been receptive to that. ASC transaction design, we got they understood that this is a risk dimension. We valued it at 2.1 million. And then in addition to that, we bought 20%. So if you kind of look at where we are, on execution of 20%, which was 420,000. We're looking at probably getting 8% return on that, if not this year, which is good. We have options and to buy more in the next 4 years. We have an option to buy 20%. So really, we want them to help make that center as viable and profitable as possible and help us recruit GIs so that when they sell the next 20%, it's worth more. Because that discount factor will go if it's staffed by younger physicians. It would change how you value those numbers. And then we have an option, a third option to buy up to 60% 2 years after that. And then one of the other things we did put in the intent was that we want them to sell their shares to other physicians, because physicians are more likely to be more effective and efficient when they have commission. So that we always have ownership percentage. With that, the other thing that pioneers at IVHD worked on is coming up with really recruitment tools, because we have full-time recruiting to the area. So what we've been using is income guarantees, which are around the 75th percentile. GMA is all the higher, which is benchmarking. We do use an independent fair market value company, brokers, the ones who do it for years to determine that everything's within fair market value. So we pay them on a work RVU, but we expect them to be off the guarantee after the year, to be working just on production, so that we're not sitting there constantly supporting people. But to get people to our community, we're competing against a shortage in that service line in other hospitals across the country. So it's not like, hey, there's 40 GIs out there. Let's just pick 4 of them up. There's fewer than them than there are jobs. So they're in the and so the other thing that makes it more attractive is now we have an ASC. Most places don't have an ASC, but they're available to them to buy into. And it's part of one of our options that make us a little bit more attractive in the long term. We kind of look at it as someone buys in at 13.3% this year, they probably expect about $50,000 profit on a $280,000 investment. It's pretty good return, especially where the market's doing less meetings. The last part of what we did is the ASC is in a building that's owned by Dr. Weisenheimer and Dr. Lee. They were selling that building. And the building was up for sale, and there was interest from a few doctors in town. The leases in that were very short term. Last thing we want to do is buy a building with an ASC, which are pretty difficult to build. To build one now is very, very expensive. We valued it at 2.1. Probably to build one now would probably be closer to 5. Just the cost of the regulations and the cost of materials. So we didn't want to lose where we were going to practice. So we went in and did an offer to buy a vacant lot in the Horizon Medical Office building in El Centro. Vacant lot is where, do you guys know where the Shake and Wake is?
Is that by monasterio? Like right next to it?
So there's a little Shake and Wake
Yeah,
area.
no worries.
I bought one just to try it. For the community, so it's where the Shake and Wake is. We got the land for $292,000. It brings in about $9,600 rent. The good part about that is we can actually expand the ASC in the building if we want to. When we purchased the building, which is 11,971 square feet for 3.6 million roughly. It's about $300 per square foot, and their annual rent of $350,000. So we're actually we'll have a retain a pretty good rate of return on that purchase. So that's kind of where we are with ASC. ASC, the first quarter exceeded numbers from the prior year. We're still waiting for what the distribution will be, when that will be. But once the accountant does produce those, we'll support. But so far, it's met expectations and doing well. Any questions?
So when we purchased the building for 3.6, is that financed or do we pay cash on that?
So we have not finished that. Right now, we're in the process of due diligence. So we're working with the Jonas firm. They're helping us do the final bit of due diligence, but it's planning to use cash for that.
Yeah, what's the monthly payment projected?
No, it's cash.
Oh, it's gonna be cash.
Yeah.
So we'll just have a monthly revenue.
Okay.
So if we look at it, probably after, I think we have about 75,000 in annual expenses. We're looking at 275,000 profit per year.
And so is that 75,000 that you mentioned in expenses, is that for
Taxes.
what about the capital improvements? Because it says everything's pretty old and needs, it already been depreciated.
So that's inside the building. Inside the building is fine. It needs paint, but the capital expenses that we both for CapEx were on the ASC, not on the building. The building itself, we had an inspection done and that came out with really very little current needs. Will there be needs in the future? I would assume so. I mean, air conditioning is there.
So we just own the building, not the equipment inside.
That's correct. We own the building, not the equipment inside. We own 20% of the equipment inside. If that makes sense. And then we own none of the equipment inside of the other leased areas.
I'm pretty sure that's where you're talking about industrial, whatever is the other side of
Yes.
the lease. So we're thinking on that whole thing.
It's,
I do have one question relative to this whole, GI business. I don't want to guess, but I know that they have some agreements with the insurance companies where the procedures that they do, like the colonoscopies, are, covered based on what they charge versus back in the day when they were done here at the hospital and people were left with huge out-of-pocket expenses. And I think what you said is that they have negotiated pretty good rates.
Yes, so
inside it, and we'll be able to take those on so that people that go to that facility are still, they're not gonna end up having to come up with a huge out-of-pocket to make up the difference.
so we actually had a meeting with Dr. Olney yesterday, and he was very happy. Like, we're happy that no change occurred, really, which is what we wanted. So an ASC, the reason to have an ASC is you have a lower cost of care setting for lower acuity, quick procedures. And if you tried to put 6,000 procedures in one of our hospitals, it wouldn't happen. And so, the goal is that Medicare sets a fee schedule that's lower. They actually, for the fee schedules for the other payers, are generally a percentage higher than that, but it is nowhere near the cost of a hospital. I'll give you the example. It's probably $700 or $800 to have a colonoscopy done at an ASC, whereas the hospital is going to be $1,100. And so there's just that differential naturally between the cost of care in a hospital and the cost of care in the ASC.
That's a
Yeah,
benefit
so it's
to us, because we can still
right.
do them at the lower cost.
Yeah, and that's where the ASC comes into play, because to your point, where it is cheaper, like a lot of the IPAs that we have in our area and some of the other insurances, they won't even want you to have it done at the hospital if there's an option for an ASC to have it done. So part of doing that, just like he said, is we wanted to be able to set ourselves up to have a situation where we can, when we come together and we start to add these other services, like ortho spine is one we're looking at, right? What's gonna, it needs space in our ORs. These are taking up space in the OR. There's other things that take up space in the OR that we can actually shift and reduce the cost of for the patient and for us as an organization by putting it in the ASC, and then open up space in the OR for some of those things that will require and do require a more advanced OR.
Yeah, I had a question. So if I understood correctly, we basically bought into Dr. Suleiman and practice, right? We're partners with them now.
In the ambulatory surgery center. Correct.
Okay, so are we buying another portion of a building where they're practicing right now?
We are buying the entire building where doctors, El Nuhi practices, Dr. Alama, and the ASC.
Okay, so where Suleiman's office was at the principal.
He is now practicing up here across the street.
Okay, so we're not buying into the principal.
Yep.
What's the? So you said it'll profit about $250,000 a year. Is that average? Or if we buy into more into the business, will that increase?
So the business profit's separate, so that we're looking at our portion of that is probably we spent 420. We're probably looking at close to maybe 50,000 on our 420, so about 8% return is what we're expecting. Again, not bad for what we're looking at, and then on the building itself, we're probably around the same percent, between 6 and 7% return.
Yes, we buy more into it than that, yeah, because we'll have a higher percentage.
It's the Horizon, so it's right next to this.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's the only building we're talking.
That's
the only
building.
I thought it was two buildings.
It's just the one.
And the vacant one.
There's actually three businesses in that structure.
Right.
There's Dr. Arama, there's Virgin Care, there's Dr. Onwiki, and then Valley Hospital. But it's one structure
So where Suleiman practices now, where does he practice?
Here.
here.
In the hospital, he doesn't have his own
We
office.
have, yeah, he gave up that one and came here, that was part of that deal, was bringing one.
You don't want to.
Shaken like leasing.
Yep.
Yes.
We're not buying shaken like.
Right, they lease the space.
So they lease the space, and whenever they're on a month-to-month lease, so we just need to give
I
them.
thought it would be a bad idea. We can give the employees free care.
Or discounts, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to buying equipment, are we still gonna maintain the same percentage of ownership in the equipment, or who's gonna buy the equipment if it's outdated?
The ASC is its own operating business, so that actually operates under its own licensure because it has to. And so that if they need to give money or contribute money, currently we would contribute 20% and the physicians would contribute 80% if they need anything. They currently, bought on the scopes in the last couple of years. They keep, the business is in really pretty good shape. And they do buy new equipment, but they, maximize the life of what they have. And they lease a lot of equipment too on reagents. So there's a lot of cleaning and supplies and other things that there's different ways to get equipment. The equipment's less expensive through leases and other methodologies, but we don't foresee, and we went through a capital plan with them, that they need any large capital in the next year.
Yeah, it's running very tight ship.
Right, so anything that happens in there is bought by the business, so then it just reduces that amount that we end up getting in the end. So our percentage could go down because the expenses went up because we had to purchase a capital item. So, maybe we have 4% because we had to put into part of that.
But we've already seen cases go up because Dr.
Yeah.
Speed is now
Right, Dr.
practicing
Speed
down
is
there.
practicing
So,
now.
our goal was to have this collaborative relationship, and it's really kind of working. Could it be better? Of course, but if you look at last year's cases over this year's cases, we had Dr. Handy slow down, we had Dr. Speed pick up, we have other people that are interested in coming. And we're maintaining it. Our biggest fear was losing that service line in the community, because we just don't have the capacity anywhere, either between here or El Centro, to take 6,000 cases.
So essentially, it's gonna take us about 15 years to get a return on this investment.
5 years.
How do you get, it's 250 grand a year, and it cost us 3.6.
Oh, on the land. Oh, so the cost, I'm sorry, I thought you were the business. Yeah, so on the land, yes, the land to pay it off itself would probably be 15 years.
And then what about with the business?
The business just has a, should be paid some off about
How much do you, what was the purchase price of the business?
it's 420,000. So it's
20%.
for 20%, so it's 20% of the 2.1 million. So it's about a little bit less than 5 years down. Which is, in healthcare is pretty good. Other areas you want it to be a year. Anything else? I appreciate you guys letting me work with you. It's nice to get to talk to you all formally.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great night.
Travel safe.
Thank you.
Where's the item on the agenda?
Under her report out.
Doesn't get under my operational.
Next time it's gonna be a report, don't get it ahead of time. Now we're going to item 6, the elements of effective governance by Jeff Bills with confidence consultant.
Well, it's nice to be with you. Thank you for inviting me, Katie. I had good feelings when I drove up here. I spent 27 years with the Scripps organization. And back in about 1982, we actually had, I came out and we had some discussions about a relationship. Things changed and it didn't happen. But Chris was telling me that the person he works with at Scripps Mercy, Tom Gavir, Tom actually used to be my assistant. So I didn't know what to think. I was either getting really old or time has gone by so fast I don't remember much. But like Laddie, I just got through with some ankle surgery. Would it be okay if I pull the chair up?
Yeah.
I want to have the kind of open discussion with you that will help you be a really good governing body. And it requires some really straightforward discussion about how boards or governing bodies work. I want you to know as we go through, this is just an outline. I want you to interrupt me at any point in time, because as we go through some of this information, you're going to clearly have case studies, for example, come into your mind. And I want you to be able to ask me, and we can actually discuss those as real life case examples to help you understand what healthcare governance is all about. I don't know if you realize you jumped in to being a board member in perhaps the most difficult governance related industry there is. You know that? This is a tough world. It has a lot to do with the fact that you are now involved with medical practice in a way that's strictly oversight, but it's a lot more complex. And you will begin to see that as you continue your path down this governance trail. So you've got to be better than the average board. And you've got to really be focused on what it means to govern effectively. It's not only hard, but it requires more discipline than any other board function I can think of. And since I retired from my hospital administration days and going from running a single hospital to running a system of hospitals, I don't think I've seen as many changes as we've seen in healthcare the last little while. So as we go through these outline principles, don't hesitate to ask questions or just bring up a case that you need insight into, and we'll make sure we cover it. We've got about an hour, so I'll try to modify things to hit on the most important points. Sound fair enough? Perfect. You're okay with that?
Sir.
First of all, I want you all to understand that your role is oversight. A governing body oversees things. You are not management. Okay, you with me? I can't tell you how many boards, especially bad boards, never learn the difference between those two responsibilities. And it's more critical in healthcare, especially where there are clinical issues. You would never think of jumping in and trying to tell a physician how to practice, would you? It would never happen. You would not jump in and try to tell a registered nurse how to give the best patient care. And that would apply to every single clinical area of a well-functioning hospital. But yet a lot of boards want to get lazy and they want to get into employee relations, or they want to get into how the employees are treated, or they want to get into things that are management issues. You are on this board to govern, not to manage. Yeah, you're here to manage your own affairs, but you're not here from the strict purpose of managing the organization. You delegate that through your core responsibilities to your chief executive. And once you understand that delegatory responsibility, you then monitor performance to make sure that the organization is performing the right way. You oversight by managing results, so to speak, but you don't manage day to day in any way. Now, can you think why that's so important, that distinction is so critical? The minute you as board members cross the line into management, the whole organization becomes confused. And believe me, employees in this organization, if they think you as a board member are listening to them and will do something for them, they will manipulate you in the worst of ways. My best story about this was, and remember, your position is a little different than self-perpetuating boards, okay? But when you jump in and try to manage, you're only asking for the trouble that comes with people who have to manage. The best example I can think of was a board in Oceanside, California, an elected district board. And they had a member on the board who was very upset about a management, an operational issue. And in the process of trying to fix it herself, got way over involved, confronted the employee, and the employee hit her, knocked her unconscious, and she has permanent brain damage. Now, that's serious stuff, right? And everything turned out as good as it possibly could. And I would never say that those things are only reserved for hospital administrators. But you get my point. You have the distinct, noble privilege of governing. And there's nothing more important than the governance aspect of an organization's long-term success. So no matter how tempted you are to get into the nuts and bolts of the operations, discipline yourself so that you don't. Instead, provide the oversight function where you, using what I'll describe in a couple minutes as a key dashboard of indicators, know how the organization is doing. And that's not just from an operations point of view, but remember, you have ultimate responsibility for you're a little different ways, but you, in essence, have the ultimate responsibility for the clinical quality in this organization. And there's no way you can manage that without delegating it to trained professionals. And the same thing applies on the management side. You with me?
Yes.
That's absolutely critical. I can't stress it enough. Working with another board just recently, they were confused about who should speak for the board. In your organization, you have a president. Your president or a delegated individual, whether it be the communications director, whoever it might be, speaks for the organization. In today's world, people will want to get an opinion from each of you, especially on controversial issues. And they will pit board member against board member. In order to create conflict or a disturbance, you as a board need to be very careful that you speak in unity through one individual. Working with a client one time, I suggested, recommended that, and one of the board members said, I can't do that, in a private meeting he wanted to have with me. And I said, why? And he said, because I like seeing my name in the newspapers too much. Now, newspapers aren't read like they used to be, but you get my point, right? Being a board member means that you discipline yourself to understand that the governance role is actually more critical to an organization's success than any other role within the organizational structure. Okay. So I want you to take this outline. I'm going to go through a few key things. The key role of oversight is focused on mission, values, culture, strategy, policy, hiring and retaining the chief executive, evaluating performance, setting a good governance example, which includes evaluating yourself so you can get better, and doing what you need to do to make sure that this organization has an excellent community standing. Now, in your current situation, as you're making changes, you have a chance to do something in this window of opportunity you will never get again. Your community is looking for things to be different with you, right? You have a chance to show them that you are stable, professional, and highly disciplined as a board of directors, as a governing body. Now, a couple key things. Remember this saying as it relates to your role as a board. Eyes in, hands out. You with me? Whenever you have a tendency to think that you're going to jump in and try to manage something, discipline yourself to back off and say, remember, good governing bodies, we have our eyes in, but our hands are out. Now, some of you in the room right now might be saying, I don't know about that. I don't know if I can do that. I guarantee, I'll bet you a chocolate milkshake, if they still make those in broth, that if you don't show that discipline, it will not be very long before you have discord amongst the board and you have all the other subsequent problems that come when you let that happen. You're setting values and establishing culture for this organization. And in this new structure, this new role, you have a chance to do it perfectly right. What that means is that in your board meetings, you are absolutely professional. That you understand how to have open dissent. You don't argue with each other. You may disagree, but you do it in a way that shows complete and total trust and respect for one another. as an individual board member, you don't dominate the agenda. You don't overtalk. It means that you are prepared, that you don't use the board meeting to do your homework. It means that you have done all your research, and we'll talk about this in different structure in just a minute, so that when you come to this board meeting, your oversight function is professional and efficient, and you make critical decisions that will affect management's ability to do what's right and be very successful. A board's primary function is to establish an environment where its delegated to leadership team can be successful. With me on that? It's like a manager. How many of you like baseball? Anybody like, well, the Padres, they're so frustrating. I know, Ken. It's like the manager of a baseball team. If you're good, you find ways to create an environment where your players can be their very best. That's what you do as a governing body. You create the strategy, the policies, the culture, and the values that allow your medical staff and your management team, your nursing staff, your respiratory therapy, every single part of this organization to be their very best. My brother called me this morning, actually, as I was driving to the airport to come here, and his wife just had surgery had a fused back. And they were telling me how every single episode in her care went wrong. Now that's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? She needed her CPAP. She stayed one night in the hospital. She needed her CPAP to get a good night's sleep post-surgery. And they didn't bring it to her until 1 in the morning. She was discharged, her doctor discharged her at 10. But all the other details that needed to be taken care of weren't finished until 3:30 in the afternoon. And they couldn't find a walker for her to use. And then when they went to the pharmacy to pick up her pain meds, the order hadn't even been called in. Does that sound like a hospital where you want to be? Does that sound like a hospital you want to be the governing body of, or the CEO of, or the director of nursing of? Absolutely not. It's only when the board performs its role perfectly, management performs its role perfectly, that the organization thrives. Now, you can tell I'm pounding this part big, aren't I? Because it is the most essential element of what governing bodies do. I sometimes, in fact, working with a board in Los Angeles not too long ago, one of the board members actually made the statement. He said, sometimes it's what we don't do that creates the greatest success. Meaning, we don't go outside our lane. Now, if you look at this outline, a lot of boards get confused about strategy. You are responsible and accountable for the strategies of this organization, its strategic direction, its long-term success. But again, you are not responsible for setting productivity standards in a department of the hospital. You are responsible for global strategy that positions the organization for long-term success, which means that you do things like set a strategy for solid financial futures. You set strategy as it relates to overall employee relations, but you never manage employees, especially employee discipline. Haven't you had a situation come up where you've had someone in the organization receive counseling on an everyday performance basis, and they've come to the board, made an issue out of it? Okay, how do you handle that? You don't. You put it back in the hands of management, which you delegate authority to. And then because you're monitoring management's performance, you will notice that they had 12 employee relations issue in a 6-month period, because you're looking at indicators that tell you that. And when you see it, you know it's a problem. If you as a board try to address every little issue that seems to come up that might disrupt the organization, your view of things gets clouded. And as a result, you come to conclusions that basically cause you to make decisions that don't help the organization. When you develop strategy, and one of the first things as a board you want to do is think clearly through how you're going to develop your strategic plan. Strategic plans are not like they used to be, where you look at strengths and weaknesses, and then you publish, you put it in writing, and then everybody puts it on a shelf and doesn't look at it forevermore. Real strategy is now you as a board allocating the resources to accomplish long-term goals that gives your management team flexibility in an environment that's constantly changing. There's only one constant in healthcare anymore. And that constant is everything changes all the time. So you as a board, you have to be sure that you're saying to your management team, here are the resources that you've asked for, that you need to make sure that you can adapt and change quickly. Because how quickly an organization can adapt is a function of their long-term success. You're also responsible for policy. Policy are those things that separate operations from how the organization works. So a policy about your financials, what your spending authority is, and how you delegate that to your leadership team. Those are all policies. Yes, that's what you do. That's right up governance alley. And that's what you have to be really good at. Now, another really important thing is you hold the final authority for hiring, retaining a successful CEO. The best organizations, the best governing bodies understand that when you make good hires and they stay a long time, they develop tenure, that you're sending a message to the community that the board and management get along. And in healthcare, when you send that message, what comes with it is the feeling in your community that they will get good patient care here. We've done study after study with organizations. Organizations who turn their CEO over all the time have very negative survey results when it comes to quality of patient care. Even in situations in communities where they have long tenure and the strong relationship between governance and management, and some of their patient indicators are bad, the community thinks it's better than it actually is. Isn't that crazy? But it happens all the time. So when you hire, and I don't know your situation here well enough to speak to it, so take this in general terms. When you as a board make a hiring decision at the CEO level, your thought process should be, we're making this hire until they decide to leave. Too many boards are constantly allowing themselves to focus on the minutia and getting themselves into a position to constantly criticize the CEO, find reasons to say they're not working, we need to make a change. Studies show that every change in leadership, whether it be a healthcare organization, a manufacturing plant, it does not matter. Every time you make a change in your senior leader, you have to go through the changes and the adaptations that come from adapting to a new CEO leader. It takes between 5 and 11% of the organization's success. It either puts it on hold or is diminished entirely. This is the same thing that you should be promoting as part of your value system here. You not only want that for your management team, but you want to extend that feeling to every level of the organization, right down to the front line. You want people to stay a long time here, so they gain experience and they gain the kind of knowledge so you can promote from within. Excuse me. The smaller you are as an organization and the more rural you are, the harder it is to recruit talent. So really smart organizations understand that they have to strategically implement programs, give direction to management to implement programs that train their own. So a more rural hospital your size, you as a board need to encourage from a strategic and policy perspective, providing the resources for this organization to train its people to become better and better, and as a result, stay here for long tenured periods of time. I'm doing all the talking. Anyone have questions? Any thoughts? Does this make sense to you? Am I preaching to the choir?
No, so we came in an environment, especially on this board, where we're absorbing other boards, right? And so therefore the culture at this hospital is different than the culture at the one we're gonna be assuming here pretty soon. And what I see sometimes is that, for example, because the people in this, and we'll just use this one as an example, maybe used to doing a certain thing a certain way because of a previous board, which kind of contradict to some of the things and the ethos that you're talking about with regard to, you know, us supporting the CEO, so that therefore our culture and our strategy can filter down. Sometimes organizations have people on the front line that are used to being able to, for example, complain about the C-suite or complain about the CEO. So from my own personal professional experience is that the way we can get away with that is to have established guidelines and protocols as to how to go about in complaining on one of the C-suite people, for example, having a bona fide spelled out internal complaint process.
Arturo, that's a really good point. Let's make it a case example, because.
And hold on, sir.
Oh, excuse me.
Because from the get-go, we have understood and believe it, she's even said exactly what you talked about, having eyes in and hands out multiple times. We do believe in that, and we believe that we need to hire people in leadership positions that have the confidence that us as a board are going to be doing exactly what you're talking about, send policies and then let them execute them, and then us observe to make sure that those things are being executed the way we ask, right? And then obviously we make adjustments, but ultimately the decision making is on the CEO and not us, because they're the ones that get paid to go do the job that we ask them to do.
Yeah. Well, now take what you just said and put it into culture terms. You now have an opportunity as a new board to develop a whole new culture in this organization. And you do it by being highly disciplined. So for example, as soon as the community and the workforce sees that something's a little different, they will test you as board members to see if you will go back and do things the way it was done in the past. So if a staff member comes to you, Arturo, and says, I'm really upset with this, and this happened, how do you respond?
Well, I would tell them to, number one, if there's a union, adhere to whatever their MOU or bargaining unit says. However, if there is if we're using the example of the complaint process, then go talk to your person, which ultimately will get back to HR, right? And
No,
then,
but what do you say to that person? What are the words that you speak to them? What do you say?
ask me again.
If a staff member, let's say a rad tech comes to you and complains about what he or she thinks is going on in the hospital, what do you say to them?
Talk to your supervisor.
That's an important part, but you also say this, you say, I appreciate you letting me know, but as you know, I'm a member of the board. I don't manage the organization. So I want to encourage you to go back and talk to your supervisor. But here might be the most important thing you do. You don't leave it at that. You make sure you get that name and you go to Chris
Follow up.
and you tell him what happened and what you said. It will only take 2 or 3 of you doing that a couple times before the organization will know there's a new sheriff in town. Okay? And I don't mean that as an individual. I mean that the rules have changed. Okay? Very, very important. Now, let's use another quick thing that happens all the time. Let's say that a member of the medical staff comes to you. Have you had that happen yet?
Yes.
100 times? What do you say? How are you structured here? How's the medical staff structured? What do they have in place? They have a chief of staff, right? You deflect that immediately to the chief of staff. And then you follow up and make sure the chief of staff knows. And you also tell Chris what happened. Once you discipline yourself to do that, the organization will change the way it behaves, and you will start establishing new cultural norms. Now, any questions about any of that? Make sense?
What about the complaint is about the CEO?
Okay. The CEO is one of those things where you as a board have to be completely united in your approach. So let's say, Anola, someone comes to you and complains about the CEO. The very first thing you do is you let Catherine, as the board president, know. Okay? And she then is responsible for triaging those comments to a point where something, if needed, is done. Okay? This is where the very best performing boards put such trust in their own leadership, and they communicate so well with each other in closed session that nothing ever gets out of control. So you would tell Catherine may decide that at the next board meeting in closed session, because you not only told her about this, but James has told her about a similar situation, and Tomas has said the same thing. So she may say, I think I should mention this and do it with Chris. I don't know how often Catherine and Chris meet. When I was running hospitals, I had a board president one time that wanted to meet every day. Can you imagine? And after the 3rd day, I looked at him and I said, are you getting as sick of me as I'm getting of you? And he said, yes, but I didn't know what to do. I'm new. He was brand new as a board chair. Okay. I said, what do you think we should meet? How often? He said, well, about once every quarter. I said, no, that's going feast and famine. But it's not, no, we got to meet like once every 3 weeks, 2 weeks. I said, that's the kind of communication you need to have. But when there's complaints about the CEO, you never, as a board member, go to the CEO yourself and try to figure it out. Don't do that. It creates paranoia. It creates insecurity. It creates distortion, and nothing ever is solved. You move through your leadership channels, and Katie will decide with your help, because you're communicating openly about what goes on. Now, there's another thing, and I'm jumping around on the outline, but good boards, they do not wait for a financial report and go into the nitty-gritty of the financials. You decide, working with each other as a board, your CEO and the chief of the medical staff, what key indicators you want to watch. So Chris may say to you, there are some things that are always monitored by the board when it comes to our health as a managed organization. Things like financials, bottom line. But you don't, and if you look on your outline, I've just used this as an illustration. You see these little pie charts? You'd be surprised how effective these are. And the best organizations in the country, our best clients, Peter Bent Brigham, okay, Scripps, Cleveland Clinic, they use performance indicators. So you as a board, every single month, you know what you want to see, which tells you how healthy your organization is. And Chris shows you those key performance indicators. Your chief of the medical staff does the same thing. In many organizations, the director, vice president of nursing, chief nursing executive does the same thing. Now, I don't know all the dynamics, and I'm sure you're in progress, but you don't have a medical doctor on your board yet, do you? You have plans to?
The publicly.
Right, but you can ask the chief of staff, for example, to attend and give a report. You as a board need to decide how you want to affect that relationship with your medical staff. Because what do you think physicians in your community are saying right now about your newly formed board? They're waiting to see what you do. They're waiting. So at the very least, you should carefully consider asking the chief of staff to attend your board meetings and make a report. By doing that, you delegate accountability, because he gets crap from his physicians or her physicians all the time. And if he doesn't bring them up, or she doesn't bring them up at the board of directors meeting, then only the chief of staff has to be accountable for that. You cannot be an all-inclusive community healthcare entity without input from the medical staff. Now, there are different ways, and if you want our help, all I have to do is ask, but you need to carefully consider how you're going to structure that. Interrupted.
Within the, I believe, 8918, there's actually provisions for us to put together a medical advisory board, if I'm not mistaken. It's not something you would recommend that it was a requirement. I think it was just something.
It's optional
It's
to establish
optional.
a non-voting community advisory committee of
Yeah.
community members.
And Adriana will also tell you that you can invite the chief of medical staff to your board meetings anytime you want. Now,
Well, I guess my question is, would you recommend that we follow through, have this medical advisory like board, or just have the chief?
I do both. Here's what I do. This is based on how I've seen it different organizations do it. This is what seems to be the most effective, work best. You invite the chief of staff to give a report at every board meeting. And you invite the chief of staff to sit on any of the subcommittees, one, that he or she may choose. Then you set up your medical advisory committee to meet with the board once every quarter or 3 times a year. You may decide to do it twice a year, but your intent is to send a message to the chief of staff that you want him or her to help you develop this advisory committee so that the board can hear from medical staff members how things are going. Okay? Now you have to be very careful because it's not a gripe session. You're not inviting them in to just bitch and moan about things, because that's what they'll do if it's not structured. You give them an agenda. You say, we want to know and get an update from you on out-migration. How many patients are we losing to the bigger hospitals in urban areas? What specialties do we really need and should we focus on in terms of recruitment? It's not the kind of meeting, advisory, where you say, and we also want to know how happy you are with the CEO. Because that would be as unfair as asking that advisory committee to come and say, how good do you think we are as a board? Don't do that. You have to structure it right. Now, in your new state, you also have the option of doing some other interesting things to change the culture and change your perception in the community. You're going to have board meetings now where the community's invited, right? They have every right to come. How do you make sure that you're engaging with your community the right way? One, you make sure that they can give input, which they can, but you also allow them the opportunity for written input that they can submit online and you can review later. You also have open meetings with your community. So for example, I'm just making this up. You've got to do it what's unique to your culture in this city, but you would have twice a year open house with the board at Pioneers. Anyone who wants to come would come. I'm just making this up again. They come here to the hospital, they come into this auditorium, there's punch and donuts, whatever you want. And you as board members are here and you mingle and you say hello to them. You do things like invite them to come to the board meetings if they ever have an issue. You do more than you know they're capable of following up on. You're with me on that, right? You know how to work that. And this is where you rely on your management team again and their expertise in understanding how the community works. And you rely on your own understanding of the community because you've all lived here a lot of your lives. But good boards, especially public boards, are having open houses with their community. You may call it something else or do it a little different way. They are constantly open for evaluation, and they make sure that people never feel hindered if they give constructive criticism. That's the key. It's no different. Your role in your community with your community members is no different than what your management team has to do with the workforce when they survey them or they get employee opinion surveys. Okay? Same kind of concept. And you have to be smart. You have to be a step ahead of your community. And you don't get this opportunity. If you wait too long and you get rumors flying about how the board didn't do this or didn't do that, or there was a bad case, or patient care suffering, or this happened, or the doctor's upset, you can't go back and remedy it. You've only got this window of opportunity to develop trust and respect with your community that exists right now. You're no different than a new hospital with new ownership. You've seen across the country how a hospital used to be owned by so-and-so, or they might have been a nonprofit, or they might have been a for-profit, and then all of a sudden they merge with a system and they become different. They go through a very elaborate outreach strategy to make sure that people know the new difference in culture. You as a board want to send a message to this community that you are different than the past. When you are together with your community, and you may want to put out some releases, you may want to put this on your website, you may do a lot of things, but you want to send the message to the community that you're different than in the past. That this board is made up of people who care about this community, who are invested in this community, and who understand what it means to govern and understands the difference between governance and management. And your objectives long-term are to make sure you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in effect, lay out your strategy. So the whole community knows. You wouldn't word it like you do for yourselves, but you word it in ways the community understands. With me? Make sense? Now, a couple things about you as board members. And I'm just going to say it straight out to you so you understand. You always must be prepared when you come to a board meeting. You must attend regularly, meaning you had to break both legs and both arms not to attend your board meetings. You've got to be so steady and so reliable that that message goes out to the community that you're serious about this governance responsibility. In your board meetings, you've got to find ways to make key decisions so board meetings don't languish forever. Don't let yourself become more city council than hospital board. You're with me on that. You know exactly what I mean, right? Okay. City council, griping, moaning, bitching, go 18 hours. Hospital boards, efficient, professional, understand governance, respect each other, respect management, respect the medical staff, and they last an hour and 45 minutes. Now, Adriana may or may not like this, but a lot of public boards are finding ways to allow the community to input differently than just standing up at a meeting and taking 25 minutes each. You should explore that with her to find out what the options are. Because sometimes following up is more effective than just listening and not being able to do anything in a board meeting. Did you all understand what that just meant, right? When you're listening to someone at a board meeting, you can't say, okay, here's what we're gonna do. And walk away saying, watch, nothing's gonna happen. That board's no different than the old one. They'll just give me lip service and it's over. But if you take it seriously and you delegate it the right way, and very frequently, you'll have someone on the board who's kind of the expert in the area they're concerned about. You have them follow up, and those community members go, my gosh, I never had a board member follow up with me one-on-one personally. And you begin to change your reputation and culture in the community. Make sense? Understand? Next. You cannot be a board that second guesses each other. When you vote, you do not go out and say to people in your community, you know something, that passed. I never liked that in the first place. You don't alienate or position yourself negatively in front of the board. The best story I've ever experienced with this was actually when I was just a young associate administrator, and I was in the board meeting, and we had 9 people on the Scripps board. This is going back so far now that I'm not disclosing any confidence. And these board members went at it. Man, it was respectful, but they had one guy. He had a different opinion than the other 8. And he was strong in his presentation and he went at it. Finally, the board chair called for a vote. They voted 8-1. And the room got stone cold quiet. Can you imagine? You know what that's like. And the guy who voted the 1 raised his hand, looked at the board chair and said, "Could I say something, please?" The board chair said, "Sure." Remember, this is self-perpetuating. The other board members had picked him to be on the board. And here he was in one of his first board meetings, being the sole dissenter against 8 other people who had it right. And he looked at the rest of the board members and he said, "Ladies, gentlemen, I want you to know something. I appreciate you letting me express myself openly with open, trustful, and respectful dissent." And the vote was 8-1. But as soon as the vote was over, it was 9-0. And you can rely on me to support this decision as if it was my own. That's the way you want to be as a board. Do not badmouth each other in the community because of your differences in vote. You speak as a team, as a group, as a single purposeful entity. Don't allow people to divide you because you may not have voted the same. And keep in mind that they know how you voted. So you, as board members, have to consider how it looks to your community, even though you might disagree. How many total board members do you have? 8, 7?
7.
You have to be careful about how it looks to your community if the vote is 4-3 every single time. Some of you, understanding open dissent, have to know that there's a time when you vote with what you know is going to be the majority because it sends a message to your community that you as a board are together. And that is hard to do. But every one of you is bright and smart. You know how these votes are going to go. So you have to say to yourself, am I going to be the dissenter? And what does that mean? Or do you say publicly, so everyone in that room can hear, I am grateful that this board can engage in open dissent. And even though I voted as one of the 3, I now support this decision because the majority spoke 100%. In fact, you have an ethical obligation to leave the room making that clear. Because if you don't, you go out and badmouth it, you violated the most common, most important ethical principles, which is you're not being honest with yourself or with your team members, with your fellow board members. Any points on that? I'm speaking it like it's the way it is, right? Am I being too blunt about this? It's good. Okay, good. Another thing that most boards don't understand is that unanimity, meaning you're all together, sends a much stronger message to the staff, to your management team, and to the community than what you think may be the Lone Ranger persona that goes with being different. Okay? Sometimes we need a Lone Ranger, but sometimes we need Tonto. Some of you might be too young to know the Lone Ranger, right? Have you seen it on a rerun with young people?
Black and white.
You all know the Lone Ranger? Everybody knows? What did Tonto do all the time? There were times even on that crazy TV show when he would disagree with the Lone Ranger. But
I always felt Tonto was the smartest.
yeah, he was definitely the most diplomatic. So sometimes that's what you have to be. Is you as board members need to understand the power of pure diplomacy, because it is vital, especially when you're a public board like you are. Questions?
So better be Tonto, not Tonto.
Very good. All right. I don't see any point in me going through each one of these points. You're getting the gist, correct? I want to talk a little bit about mission. Remember that your mission is the guiding light for every decision you make, and it determines your values, and it will also determine the way people behave. If you bicker and gripe with each other as a board, I guarantee you that the employees at this hospital, when you're not around, will make fun of you and ridicule you. And most importantly, they will take sides. A good board can never allow that to happen, ever. So it means that you don't let an employee or a medical staff member ever divide you and in the process conquer you. Unanimity is the way you behave after the vote. And when you're together and you're constantly singing the praises of why you exist, people will begin to modify their behavior to fit your values. I love to use this example. My wife and I, we've got 3 kids, 2 boys. The middle boy has a mind of his own. He's 40 some years old now, 6 kids. He and his wife are terrific, but growing up, he had a mind of his own. And he was not afraid to stand up to me. And I can be a bit of a bear. And I thought carefully after the first couple times, he was probably only 6 or 7 when he stood up to me, kind of trembling, like, I'm gonna have to say this to you, Dad. I don't know what's gonna happen. I may not live past this moment, but I'm saying it. And he did it the first time, and I just kind of listened because I knew that overreacting would be bad. Second time, a little bit the same, but the third time, I grabbed him and I got him in the bear lock and I wrestled him around on the carpet. And I said to him, I'm so glad you've got an opinion. Now let's work on how you express it. And for the next years, we talked all the time about how important it was to have a difference of opinion. But if you can't diplomatically express it, everybody thinks there's conflict, sometimes rage, and no one can get along. So that's what you do as a board. You have to be masters of diplomacy, not only amongst each other, but with your leadership team, with the staff, and with your community. I mean, it's worth it, isn't it? Because you're getting paid so doggone much.
Donut.
We do pay the meals.
Sorry, you have a question.
You bet.
With regard to employees, as far as we're talking about complaints and things like that, when we want to implement a robust whistleblower type of program, then how do you navigate that? Because most of the time, whistleblower programs are anonymous, right? People that anonymous complaints, what have you. How do you navigate addressing some of those issues where now we don't have the opportunity to tell that person, or talk to your supervisor, bring it to the HR or what have you, or the chief?
Has your culture here been the whistleblower approach?
More, what I've experienced is more rumors that have a lot of fact to them. Let me say that. Because you do want to make sure that you're also adhere to the morale of the employees as well and not ignore them.
Yeah. Do you have a confidential whistleblower policy in the organization now?
It's like, do that kind of stuff, or go online, use their phone and that way.
And where do those complaints go?
Complaints officer.
Okay. So your compliance officer is the Switzerland of your nations.
Correct.
Independent, neutral, right? And does a good job.
Well, we don't have it right now, so it's actually with our quality team.
Okay. you risk manager, whoever.
Yeah, risk manager.
Okay,
And,
Same thing,
and the reason I ask is because, I don't know, we don't know what's going on in El Centro Regional, and here we are gonna merge two entities, and we wanna make sure that we facilitate, ongoing dialogue if we happen to have that with this kind of process.
Yeah. So here's what I'd do. Here's what I'd recommend you do. I'd sit down with Adriana and I'd say, how do we set up now, before we really are implementing it, the perfect system to accomplish what you want to accomplish? A lot of organizations have that risk manager, compliance officer, and those things are discussed by that individual with your attorney. And for the obvious reasons. And then they are triaged through the administrator, through the board president, and through the medical staff leadership. That's a good way to do it. If you spend too much time focused on the whistleblower notion, that's all you'll get in an organization. You want to begin the process of changing your culture in the ways I've already described, so that when people have a complaint, they go back through the chain of command. When you start doing that and you openly communicate that that's the way you work here, it starts to change the culture. So you don't have those whistleblowers who are just trying to. Have you seen some of the really good data that it's published a lot? Guess how many whistleblowers are actually accurate? They actually have a point substantiated by fact. 1%. Yeah. Yes. Now, on the other side of that, guess what the employee perception is about their supervisor following up on complaints? 8%. Okay. Now, I'd like to think your organization is a lot better than that. But here again is where you as a board want those key indicators to know what's going on. Okay. So you don't really care what the whistleblowing topic is, but you want to see once a quarter how many whistleblower events there were that came to your compliance officer and your attorney. If you see they're going from 3 1 month to 30 and then 50, you get my point. That's how you want to dashboard your organization. You're true to what your role is. You don't have to get down in the weeds and get your hands in where they don't belong. Make sense? And we're running out of time.
You're good. Yeah, you still have 90 minutes.
Okay.
So, oh, you don't have 90 minutes.
I was gonna say, you're gonna wear me out if I have 90 more minutes.
You got time.
On your question, Director Proctor, one of the agencies that I've represented, this was an actual issue there for a long time. And what they ended up doing, which I don't know that I would recommend to this board at this point in time, but one of the things they did is, so they have a weekly or a monthly newsletter that goes out to all the employees. And on the monthly newsletter, I was trying to find it right now, in one of the little corners right here, it's like inside or no, or like it's some chintzy little thing. And it says like complaints received on the employee hotline, or like calls received 70, emails 14. And then it says something like founded, like complaints founded, like how many were legitimate or followed, and it's like 3 or whatever. And it's complaints addressed 4, and then investigations initiated 1, or, and it's just, and it's just numbers.
Now,
it's just strict numbers.
You gotta be careful though, because that's a document that will come out from management. And a lot of
that's
people
just
won't
staff.
believe it.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is use your dashboard indicators, do exactly what Adriana has just said, only you as a board review the dashboard. And then you follow up.
and that's just for information purposes, because employees were complaining. We don't even know anything. We don't know where they go. We don't know if anything. It's like, well, of course we can't tell you. A, we don't know who the whistleblower is. B, we're not gonna tell you if we started an investigation or not, or, you know, but they just gave some raw numbers and it did temper people and it kind of became a little bit of a joke because it'd be like, you know, oh, there's only 2 of them were founded or, you know, whatever. But that's, I like the board approach better as a first step. I really like the dashboard idea, but there are kind of ideas you could do in terms of being able to communicate with employees.
Yeah,
you know,
there's another
that they're
really,
being heard, yeah.
to go along with what Adriana is saying, there's another way that good organizations from a management perspective, and I'm talking management now, not governing body. I've suggested to you how you can do that, Adriana, and I put that together. You've got a pretty good solution. From the management side, though, you hold people accountable differently. Chris knows exactly where his trouble spots are in the organization. He knows where he's got good supervisors, good managers, good directors, good leaders. You want to know the dashboard indicator to tell you how things are going in the organization. How often do you do a staff survey?
Yeah, we do a major one once a year.
Okay. You as a board should see that staff survey as an indicator, and you should allocate 10 minutes on the agenda for Chris to go over it. And then 1 quarter later, you should ask for follow-up on the key issues that were included in that indicator. And then you go through that same process every year. Remember, you don't get into the minutia. Okay? If the employee survey says that everyone's really upset with Greta, who's the director of physical therapy, that's not for you to know. Now, let's say that Chris has problems with Greta and he's in the process of counseling her. Okay? You need to know that he's going through that process correctly. So once a year, you as a board, you should ask for a report from employee relations on how many employees have been counseled, how many appeals, how many terminations, whatever it might be. And then it's up to Chris to make sure that you know that if there's a touchy termination, he brings it up to you and goes into the details without mentioning the employee's name. Because here's what happens in public boarded organizations trying to make the cultural shift you're going through. If he's counseling, and I've seen this happen over and over, if he's counseling a staff member for poor performance and it's legitimate and everything is documented, about 50% of that time, if that staff member has been a part of the organization more than 5 years, they will find a way to write an anonymous letter or come to you as a board member and complain that I'm not being treated fairly. And you will only, see, you're all nodding your heads like, we've had that happen before. And you don't get the information that they were counseled 4 times, received a verbal warning, a written warning, put on probation, and still did not correct the problem. Okay? After you go through that process once, you as a board will know that you can depend totally, complete trust, that your management team is going to go through a process that's exactly right. But the only thing in all of that is that you're involved in is you approve the personnel manual policy for the organization. With me? That's how really good organizations work. Questions? I'm doing way too much talking. Any other thoughts or questions or analysis or perceptions or reflections? I want to spend some time talking about these key indicators. These are key. This is how an organization, a board, determines organizational health. You decide what indicators you want to know? And there are obviously some key ones. Financial performance. There's some key ones for the medical staff. Every organization is actually slightly different. So you have to work with your management team, with Chris, and say what things are most important for us to dashboard indicate. So that your board meetings are streamlined, you don't spend time on things that aren't your purview or aren't central to your role. Remember, if you as a board meet and you spend 2 hours, what percentage of your 2 hours, that 120 minutes, should you be spending on whatever? Let's make it easier. In an hour board meeting, where should you be spending your time as a board? Where should you be spending your most time? What would those be? Which one first? Is there another one in your setting that might be more important than finance?
Vetted?
I said making decisions about policy.
Who gives care here? Medical staff issues. So how many resignations did you have in your staff? Is that a key indicator? How many suits have been filed against the hospital by type? I don't know what you want to measure. You have to decide that. But if I'm a board member, I want to know how good my medical care is. I might even want to pick out an indicator that tells me how many patient falls there were. Who's responsible for that? Carol, that's yours. That's a big deal, isn't it? If you have one patient fall, you get upset. If you had 6, you'd be going nuts. You wouldn't have any hair right now left in your scalp. Okay, so that's the kind of thing you want to know what indicators you want. So you look at your director of nursing and you say, what are the key indicators that we as a board should be aware of? Now, when you do that, what happens in the organization? My gosh, Carol is all of a sudden going to spend a lot more time on that key indicator, because the last thing she wants to do is come into a board meeting and report bad. Finances, absolutely, it's right up there. But you should work together. Look to your management team and say, what are the key indicators of organizational health? Discuss it and come up with no more than about 8. And then every single board meeting you have, how often are you meeting as a board?
Every month.
Do they have to?
No, they don't have to, but we were getting into 4 or 5 hour, we were getting into 10 PM plus board meetings, so.
Yeah, so you got to change that. And it's going to take some time, but you should work hard at your board meetings. If you want to act like a really top-notch medical organization, how often should your board meetings be? Once a month.
They've got a lot going on right now, in fairness.
You can't, like I was saying, you can't do that right now. But you got to start that process
That's the goal.
because it'll kill you.
Yeah.
I would say personally, that's the goal, like twice a month means.
And remember, as long as you meet once a week, they will go long once a week. The minute you go to 2 times a month, they'll adjust to being what you can accommodate 2 times a month. And when you go to once a month, all of a sudden you'll be amazed and say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize we could be this efficient. You got to work at that. By the way, board management, we spend a lot of our time, and almost exclusively my work now is with boards. And some boards, I can go into a room like this and look at you as board members, and I can tell just by looking at you and your questions and your comments and the way you're giving me nonverbal feedback, if you're going to be or are a good board. And by the same token, I can look at the group of you and I can see your nonverbal communication and know that it's only a matter of time till you're going to implode. Now, as I look at you, I get good feelings. Because you have a chance, and I think you all recognize
Yeah,
that you have a chance to make a difference
I
here.
would say we've been to war and back.
Yeah.
Since we got, we've
You
had,
have,
we've had the board meetings where there's, 2 hours of public comments and, like, not necessarily by things that were. Um,
so it's an exercise in real discipline that you're going through now, but set your goals and verbalize them. Okay, your goal is we're gonna meet once a month, and we're gonna get to that point in 9 months. Whatever your goal is, and work hard at that, and start adjusting your agenda. By the way, agenda development is key to your success. How many subcommittees do you have?
That's what I was gonna bring up. That's what I was gonna have you talk to me about, because that's one of the things I think at this point that since we don't have them, any of them operating right now in place. And I think that would be one that would, if we have those for the purposes of what we're doing here, we have a couple that are part of the other stuff going on, but for the purposes of all the stuff that you have talked about, we don't really have anything like that in place. And I think if we do, then yeah, it's much easier to have those sort of board meetings. And so we talked about it, but I think that's probably some more education that could be helpful. So if you want to dive into
Yeah,
that.
let me talk about that.
Yeah.
Thank you. You as a board,
Real quick, I have a
You
question. One of the things I think I'm struggling with is that we're a little schizophrenic right now. And that's why we have the double meetings, because it's like we have pioneers and we're governing that hospital healthcare system, but at the same time, we're still in the finalization of bringing El Centro in, so it's like we have a specific purpose over here, and now we have this purpose over here, and it's like we're literally doing a little balancing act between the governance of this facility, healthcare, et cetera, plus our job of bringing the other in and putting it all together. So, yeah, I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm just saying that I think that's why we have the 2 meetings, because we can't do all of it at one time.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
absolutely. I've been
Otherwise, I'm
through,
confused, but-
that's a really good point too. I've been through maybe 9, over the last 20 years, 9, I'll call them mergers, similar to what you're going through. And here's the one thing I've learned. It's primarily a function of working with your attorney to come up with agendas to get things done. So you as a board should work with your attorney and say, okay, what are the key things we need to accomplish? We need to put those on an agenda. You should have an agenda that is for 4 meetings out, 6 meetings out. And you're gonna accomplish check this, check this, check this, check these 2. And you gotta have those agendas strategically out there so you get that done. That is the key. Now, for your subcommittees, I have seen public boards argue about which board member should chair the subcommittee. And so to handle that, they say, we'll rotate. No. You need to decide, at least for the next 3 years, what subcommittees you want. And you need to look, and Adriana can help on this too. There are some that are required. Finance is required. Risk management is required. Am I right, Adriana? Well, if I say something that you know is wrong, correct?
I don't think that they're required by law, but I think most healthcare districts do have
Yeah.
a few standing committees, yeah.
And in order to be accredited by the Joint Commission, you have to have those committees. So you've got to have finance, you've got to have medical staff quality. And that subcommittee is basically your chief of staff reporting through the board what's happening by department. You've got to have planning, okay, which is where every capital expenditure and all sorts of engineering issues are discussed. so that you don't have to go through that detail in board meetings. So what have I said? Finance, medical staff, planning, risk management. And quality. And the way really good organizations work too is you as a board may have 8 key indicators, but how many do you think the subcommittees will have? They'll have 15. Because they're getting more detail. You don't need that detail. You just need those key indicators to say financially we're strong. Quality of care, we're strong. Planning, we have capital plan that can also be supported with capital resources. You get my point. By the way, the sooner you establish subcommittees, the easier it will be to change the way your board works, especially so you don't have 10 p.m. meetings. And you will become more efficient and more accurate in your decision making. When you decide who is going to be each of you as board members will have to be a chair of a subcommittee. Don't think that just because James works at a bank that he should be chairing the subcommittee on finance. Okay? That's in many cases the wrong thing to do. You may put James on the committee, but you may want Brenda. She's the clerk, sorry. You may want Tomas to be the chair of that committee because he's going to see things differently. And so the two of them together become much better than James leading a discussion that's centered on what James knows from his financial role. With me? Be smart about that. I've seen unbelievable things happen with boards. I'll never forget, we had a board member who this was working with a company in Seattle, Puget Sound Group Health. They don't exist anymore, but they merged. They were so efficient as a board. And they had a man who was a oyster farmer. Very financially successful, tons of money. And they put him over the planning committee. And everybody thought, oh, that's the worst thing ever. Until they realized that this guy spent 80% of his life trying to figure out how long oyster spat took to turn into an oyster. He was a magnificent planning chair. He had great strategic insight. He was a forward thinker. Then they had another situation on quality of care, and one of their board members worked out of a city called Bellingham, and he was a dock master. And this guy knew nothing about what he was asked to chair, but he was a hard worker, and they knew that he would put the effort in, and it became superb. So do that yourselves. You know, have that kind of open discussion where you know who would be best. Don't pigeonhole yourself based on your experience. Just because you're in retail doesn't mean that, you know, you got to be on that committee, so to speak. On these, did I cover that okay, Chris? On the subcommittees? That's really important. I would prioritize that now.
A lot of them you mentioned, so like would these committees report at the board once a quarter or?
They meet once a month.
Yeah, once a month. No. Do they report to the board or is it just?
Once a month.
Yeah.
So they meet once a month. Staff gets them all prepared. You have to stagger the meetings so that they get their work done and their recommendations are ready to go to the board as soon as possible. Now, here's another trick to your trade. Start this early. You do not want an organization where Chris is putting things on the agenda 2 weeks before he needs approval. Once in a while that might happen, kind of an emergency situation, but The best organizations don't work like that. The best organizations, when management is bringing to you as a board recommendations for approval, they brief you on it 1 month in advance so that you, the following month, approve it. That's important, so you have time to think about it and ask questions. And the subcommittee chair has an opportunity to delve into it for a reasonable period of time. Good CEOs are constantly thinking ahead so that every board agenda item is 60 days out. So that you as a board always have ample time to be prepared. And it goes through the committee process at least 60 days. With me on that? Very important. So that means that nursing, if you want something and it requires board approval, you got to be thinking 90, 120 days out.
But that's like some of the stuff with that. So we have a pretty robust conversation with some of the things that we bring right now. And it happens in this board setting, and that's why some of it goes on longer. So when we have those committees and you have those members of the committees and you're saying, you know, you three are part of that committee, that happens there. And then when it comes into this setting, you can say, you're still looking at the KPIs associated with it, and then you can give some more succinct things for what's happened there. And the other board members can also go to you and say, hey, last time I really didn't get a lot of information on this, can you make sure it's covered next time? Or whatever it might be, or can you look into this in your committee a little bit more and then report that out, rather than all of it like you do right now, always happening here, especially like on the finance side. You can really, when we do the finance in this meeting, because the finance team is already, committee's already hashed all that out, it goes really quick, and all that stuff moves much faster because we're not hashing it out in a board meeting. And that's it.
Plus, you're looking at your key indicators.
Yeah.
See, that's the key, because if your key indicators are selected correctly, you as a board member can look at those and get a feel immediately. And a lot of organizations will use colors. And if it's green, it's good. If it's yellow, that's, hey, we're worried. Here's what we're doing about it. Management tells you. If it's red, you haven't done your job, because nothing should ever become red unless it's an emergency. Once the bottom falls out. Have I worn you out yet? You do have another meeting tonight, right? Or you don't?
Yeah.
Do you have a regular board meeting?
We only got 3
See, that means you'll be done by 11. Let me spend a little bit, I want to spend just 5 minutes on just kind of wrapping up some things. Here's what we are seeing, looking at all our clients, all our boards. Here's what we're saying is the most important things that boards need to focus on right now. Number 1, board training and education. A lot of you are getting hit with stuff I'm telling you right now for the first time. You need constant board education where you pick out a certain topic and you may only spend 45 minutes on it, but you really get the training and education you need. Governance is a tough responsibility, and you can't do it. There's no self-help program for it. You've got to have some help. Secondly, get your board members efficient and your board meetings efficient. Because when you start going all the way to 10 o'clock, study after study shows that a lot of your decisions become not only wrong, but confusing in terms of implementation. And because there's that confusion, you rehash things. I'll bet you another chocolate milkshake that you've had board meetings where you go over the same darn thing you did the month before. Okay? That's normal in your situation for now, but you've got to work that through and out. So that when you're making decisions here, every decision is like a new decision. Crisp, efficient, effective. So that means you have to get your subcommittees working as soon as possible. Another thing that's really important is you've got to start thinking about your community standing and how you're going to use this transition to reculture this board and this organization. Think that through. We've talked about that. Lastly, it is getting more and more difficult to recruit and retain good CEOs. Here's what's happened in the industry. The pool is getting smaller. And the number of really good individuals in that smaller pool is becoming less and less. Good organizations understand that based on their market, their size, their location, their community, that they're going to match up with a CEO that's different depending on those circumstances. So if you're in LA and you're at UCLA, you're going to be recruiting a CEO who most likely will be an MD, MBA, who does a whole lot of different things than your CEO, Chris, does here. So you have to match your recruitment with your uniqueness. And then you have to say, we feel and are going to demonstrate as a board that we're going to keep our CEO until he or she decides to leave. Consistency is becoming more and more the key. And it moves all the way down to the front line, depending on how big you are. If you're in a hospital, Scripps, La Jolla, I had 8 people in nursing that could all have been nursing directors. We had a depth chart that was unbelievably strong. You don't have that depth chart here. So how long you have your chief nursing officer is really critical. So it means things like you cannot think you can get by paying at the 40th percentile, especially for clinical positions like director of nursing. You can't think that you compare your salaries with the salaries of other people in your community in different businesses. You're dealing with rare birds, and you've got to know that it takes exotic treatment at times. Think differently based on your circumstance and what your needs are. But your goal should be to retain people, especially your key talented people here, as long as possible. And then begin the process of supporting management with programs that will allow you to promote from within. There are 3 key things every hospital organization is facing right now. 1, post-COVID apathy. If you were to ask every one of these management leaders what they're seeing with their staff members, they don't see the same thing they saw 6 years ago, do you? It's a different world. The same level of commitment doesn't even exist. Did you know that across the nation, the number of emotional health days being taken by nursing staff members is up 800%? Carol, every single day you get the immediate request from a nurse saying, I'm just not emotionally right today. I don't feel right. I need to go home. They don't say I need to go home. They say, I'm taking an emotional day off. So you as board members have to understand that that kind of world is different to manage. So you have to give management flexibility and some additional resources to handle things different. How bad's your nursing shortage here? Severe? How many positions you down? Okay, how much registry are you using?
Only.
So you understand the dynamics of that situation as board members, right? So as a board member, what do you do? Like the manager on a baseball team so they can do their best work. What do you do?
Will provide career development to your employees, upward mobility.
No, you're exactly right. But that's not what you do as a board member. What do you do as a board member? You got too far into the bushes. What do you do?
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Because you're going the right, you put new policies in place and provide resources. How many people here who currently work for you do you think would be interested in becoming a registered nurse through on-the-job training? Carol, how many do you think?
Can you repeat
How many of your staff members from any job description would be interested in becoming an RN if they could do it while they worked here? You as a board need to be so open to that, say, Chris, Carol, what resources do you need to affect that new policy? That's what I meant earlier about you've got to really think outside the box to manage your policy control to give resources to do things different, because we can't keep going the way we are now.
So would policies like that go down to like assistants or any,
Say that again.
would policies like that go down to like the medical assistants that you could train on
Oh,
the
yeah.
job here?
I mean, you should say to Chris things like, we would like a 10-minute presentation on the most difficult positions to recruit and retain. And he would bring his team in and together they take that 10 minutes and they would simply say, here are the 7 key positions. And based on where they come from, each one of them would talk about why and what could be done. And then you as a board, you look at them and say, all right, we're very open to allocating resources to help you deal with those situations. Come back with us with your recommendations. See, we get stuck doing it the old way. We got to think differently. And you as a board have to be the catalyst for changing the culture so that that's the way management thinks. And when you create that culture, it makes their jobs fun. Because there are some days when they want to go home and, just drown themselves in sorrow. Questions, please.
What was the other 2 big changes?
Oh. When you think about working remotely, do you have anyone working remotely? How many?
I know I have one person.
Oh, you have very few though.
Very few, and it's intermittent, especially in circumstances.
Remote working is now the choice of about 80% of all working people. If they can work remotely, they take that. So a lot of really good people who used to want to come and work at a hospital don't, because they can find another job where they can work from home. Right? Happens all the time everywhere. So that's one of the reasons why the pools are getting smaller and the talent within the pools is getting weaker. As you become more self-reliant, so to speak, you begin to create a new culture that says, you come here to Pioneers and you can stay as long as you want and grow as much as you want. That's the first of the last 2. Here's the last one. Board members are exactly the same. It's getting really hard to find good board members. Your motivation for running for election, was it to be on a hospital board?
These board
We're all
members are all
appointed.
appointed.
We're all appointed.
Except
Yeah, no, but that's rhetorical.
Yeah, this one, yeah.
Do you know anybody that would run for election to be on a hospital board? Because of status?
Mhm.
Sure. Okay. So you want to make this experience status. You want to be so professional, so excellent that everyone in this community says, That's the best group of people I've ever seen work together, so that everyone wants to be here. Okay, and you do that right, and I'm telling you, it happens fast. You'll start to see people from the community who actually come and attend the board meetings, not because they have a question. They just want to see what you're like to figure out how they're going to replace you. Happens all the time. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Has this been helpful?
Very helpful. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for inviting me, Kate.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
And I'd love to come back
Yes. I was-
because I'm not trying to sell myself here at all, okay? But I'm just telling you that you as a board, to be best of class, you need to have at least 2 more sessions that deal with the other issues that are second and third to what we talked about today. And then you need to do a self-evaluation at the end. How long have you been working together on this board?
Just a little over a year.
Yeah.
Okay, in 6 months, at the 18-month mark, you need to do your own facilitated self-evaluation. The best boards self-evaluate at minimum once a year. Now, what does that mean? That means that you use a format that's proven, and each of you confidentially rank each other. And it's not like saying, oh, you're a 10, you're a 9. It's not like that. It's like, does Arturo speak too much in meetings?
Yes.
Does he dominate? Is James prepared? Now, it would be the same question for everybody, but you basically rank each other. Is Enola prepared for every board meeting?
No.
Okay, so then what happens is that Enola gets her ranking. And then the facilitator sits down, I would sit down with Enola and say, Enola, here's some candid feedback for you to consider. And we couch it in ways that's very productive. Now, can you imagine if I said to Enola, there's a feeling that there are times when you dominate the agenda. Or if I were to say to her, sometimes people perceive that you are asking questions at the board meeting that should have been asked before the board meeting, so it didn't take up so much time. Her response would be, well, I can do that better. All right, that's feedback I needed. I want to be a better board member. That's what I want. And then all of you go through that process to get better. There's some other things you ought to do too. Every single person who attends a board meeting, if you can get their name and email address, one of your staff members, your management team, you delegate this to Chris, he decides how it can be done. But every single one of them should get a notice saying thank you for attending the board meeting. Okay? There are about 5 other things that are at different time, different discussion, but those are the kind of things you want to do. Remember, marketing yourself as a healthcare institution is no different than if you were a card dealer. The only difference is you're much more noble and important. And I didn't say that, so don't tell your husband who's a car dealer I said that. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Stay out of trouble until I see you again.
Jeff, if we want to schedule, say, another session, do I just reach out to you?
Yeah, just reach out to me and we'll put it on the calendar.
Thank you. Or 5-10 minutes.
We're back.
Go ahead and do the public comment. board will hear comments on the item. If any person wishes to be heard, they shall stand, address the president or vice chair, identify themselves and state the subject for comment. Time limit for each speaker is 3 minutes individually per item. To address the board individually who wish to speak on multiple items will be allowed 4 minutes in each. A total of 15 minutes shall be allocated for each item for all members of the public. The board may find it necessary to limit the total time allowable for all public comments on items not appearing on the agenda to 1 hour. Do you have any public comments?
No.
Seeing none, then we will move on to board comments, reports on meetings and events attended by directors, authorization for directors, attendance of upcoming meetings and or events, board of directors comments. So, do any of our directors have any?
The auxiliary meeting, I was nominated to represent the board. And but anyway, the discussion was that their country kitchen is this next Thursday, the 17th. It starts at 9 a.m. It's a very famous casserole and sell, and usually it starts at 9 and everything's gone by 9:15. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lunch. Yeah. So it's one of their major fundraisers, and I actually recommended to all of the board members there to actually attend our meetings. And their finances and membership. But just to let you know, this Thursday at 9 a.m. Yes, yes.
Anyone else on the board have any?
No, but where's that at?
Here,
Oh, here.
right here in this box, on train.
Can I put something out though for the board? Just so that you guys are aware, since we are IVHD members, and they talked about some of the training and things like that. In September, they will have their annual meeting, and that one is actually going to be in San Diego. So it'll be a perfect opportunity for you guys to participate in that and get some of that training and so forth. At the next board meeting, you can bring some more information. It's also on the website as well. But that would be, that's actually a really good one. Some of the things that they do there, there's certain trainings that everybody's required to have, like 2-hour trainings on ethics and others on sexual harassment and stuff like that we have to do. But they'll do those at that meeting as well, so you can get that requirement met. Yeah. So just so you guys know that that is coming up, and it's right next door to us, so it's definitely a perfect opportunity for you guys. Yep, I'll bring back the exact dates and some of the other stuff. Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am. This information was provided to me by Mr. Frank Salazar, who's working diligently on our behalf. This past month, they've, in support of IVHD marketing and public affairs initiatives, developed a messaging and outreach campaign that introduced the collaboration between the two healthcare organizations of PCRMC and PMHD. The Stronger Together messaging rollout has been shaped in condition with in coordination with both CEOs, and we're excited to share that filming is scheduled to begin soon at El Centro Regional next week. Following that, we crafted a second phase of the campaign titled Coming Together to build on the momentum of the initial messaging where both hospitals' staffs are featured. In addition to messaging and media development, we working diligently with the local press to respond to inquiries and ensure consistent responses.
Have a report from our
No, the ad hoc negotiation committee met to discuss some issues relating to the merger, but no report.
There's something under that was required. We've gone down the road to our consent calendar, so
I do wanna, since we would have to make an adjustment, I do wanna put out there that at the end of May, the three of us right here, Carly, myself will actually be attending the rural healthcare, the NRHC, which is the National Rural Healthcare Conference, and that will actually be taking place during the time that our board meeting would be for the financials at the end of that month in May. So that may be something that we want to put on the agenda for the next meeting to potentially slide it one way or another, just so that we could be present for that. So just put that out there.
That's the May 22 board meeting?
Correct.
Okay.
this
Yep.
was a big change. So
For the open session.
before we move on to consent. Then, any member of the board may request that items for the consent calendar be removed from discussions. Items so removed shall be acted upon separately, and following approval of items remaining on the consent calendar. We have approval of the minutes for the meetings of March 27th, and we have approved and filed the IVHD expenses financial report. So I'm pulling anything off. I would entertain a motion.
I have a question on the.
Okay. So do we want to pull that off or?
Yes, or I can ask it.
Go ahead.
On page 2. Check made for Seattle and over. We'll talk about it. Says immigration matter.
I do. Sorry, I'm looking page 2.
Yes. It's at page 2.
I'm looking at the bottom right-hand corner numbers. Immigration matter,
The fourth page.
yeah, I see, check number 1922. I'll punt this a little bit to Chris, but we are handling a number of immigration matters for employees or doctors who are helping them transition from having visas under PMH to having visas transitioning it properly to IVHD. I am not aware of any board member immigration matter.
Yeah, that's.
Chris, are you? I think that's probably a typo or, yeah, I don't know why it says board member, but I'm not aware of a board member. There are multiple.
Yeah, we have 6.
6, yeah, we have 6.
And that number will also, I mean, we have 6 here, and then we'll have some from CRC that will end up with the same process when we do this.
And just because it's being handled as a separate check or a separate matter, because that individual has to, it's kind of like joint representation, so that the individual is the one retaining us for immigration advice because they're personally affected, but because it's related to the job, the employer is paying for it. But I don't know why it says board member. I'll look at it right now, but
Not board member, then it's a question on that correction. So that it's not paid.
yeah, I guess this, I mean, I think it's more of a, this is the memo on the check, right?
Right.
So,
And I don't know if in that system that we edited.
right, that's just the memo on the check, right?
Okay, so these, just make a note on the financials to reflect what they do now.
Well, we can't change the memo on the check registry, and this is the check registry.
Well, I
Well-
guess what I'm saying is we as a board will notate to ourselves
Yeah, in the minutes, what we can do is in the minutes, we can note that the check number 1922 on page 2 of the registry indicates board member, but that's probably an inaccurate summary.
Even the invoice also mentioned.
The invoice? Which invoice?
It's not here, but the invoice of the office. When, for the shed, the new, shed.
I'll pull up the invoice right now and address that. Let me see. There we go.
Each one is looking at it. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that off of our consent calendar and we will address that. So if there aren't any additions or corrections to the minutes for our minutes, March 29th, I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes of the consent calendar and we'll come back around to the financial report in just a moment. First, and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Those motions, aye. Carried. Oh, oh. Circle back to the
If you want, we could bring it back to the next board meeting, because I just looked through all 6 of the invoices in the detail, and they have their last names. I even did a word search, and the word board doesn't even appear in the invoice, in any of these invoices.
So dollar amount that's updated.
I think the dollar amount is the accumulation for the immigration matters, which, because like one of the bills is like 3,200 or something, and then the other bill is 1,200. So I think if you add them up, it's this $12,000 number, but I'll do that math right now.
Would it be possible that that would maybe make you go to, it was board member approved or something?
No, because it doesn't go to the board members. I mean, it goes to Katie, Chris, and Tomas. And then Tomas reported to Rosario probably. But I can follow up, Senor Valdez, with, Rosario to see what invoice she sent you to explain it,
Okay.
because I don't see anything in our invoices.
So. When we move forward with accepting and approving financials, just pending follow-up.
It is up to you. You can do that. You can just pull the financials and bring them back to the next board meeting, and then they'll have both of those financials in the next, on consent.
The board.
We approve them and then just clarification.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, since it's your question, I guess I'll throw it to you. If you're comfortable with that, then I would go ahead and entertain a motion to approve them with the understanding that you'll get clarification on your question.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstain? No, then we have a vote. Approved, and further information. So that brings us down to item 10, which is our policies and procedures. Is there anything there that anybody wanted in particular to pull out and discuss, or?
I would like to be able to pull up the standardized procedure for registered nurses, the post-exposure sexually transmitted diseases. Number two. For now, yes, and if you like, I can explain.
So you want to remove it and bring it down to another line, not ready? Okay, so we can pull that one out. So item 2, policies and procedures will be pulled from item 8. And then brought down. Are there any other questions or?
Quick question on policy procedures and emergency exercise evaluation program. It said there that we should do like an exercise, the next once every couple of years. When was the last time we had an exercise?
We've had one recently, we do tabletop with the county and then as a hospital itself, and then we have one scheduled. It's on May 7th.
So we did last year, we did one for you that we participated with. Not tornado, excuse me.
We had our training about. Sorry. I guess so. Okay, so are there any other questions or concerns with the policies and procedures before us for approval? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve policies and procedures, item A, with the exception of 2, which is being pulled for further come back at a later date. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? That brings us down to this is the authorization to purchase the Stryker arthroscopic power stroke service contract.
So we brought to you the purchase 2 ortho towers at the last regular board meeting. And we mentioned then that we would still need to submit the service agreement. So this is the service agreement for those 2 towers.
And we've looked at the items, the information that's attached to the board packet, and we have drafted a standard, like a template services agreement that we can use from here on out, that we can use as a baseline to attach our proposals for services to. So we're sending that to Strikers Council. I think Tracy sent it today. And so the recommendation would be to approve the contract terms as presented, subject to legal review, to make sure that they're acceptable with the agreement that we got.
Motion to approve, subject to legal review.
First and a second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries again. That brings us down to authorization for the.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is part of our IT. So what we do for virtual machines, that's how we deploy them, is through VMware. And so it's an integral part of what we do for our, or that we use for IT. So we need to, they come in 1 year terms as far as our subscription goes. And we're not sure, like, we need it now so we can continue to do that process, and then we'll see where that takes us after this year as far as what we'd end up doing once we all come together. But they do use VMware over at East RMC as well, but they do it a little differently.
And it looks like this item has been mentioned.
Yep.
Would that be doubling the same service?
Potentially, sometimes there's each of the different things that we do. We actually had a conversation on this today, but there's tiers on some of this stuff. So, you know, it's X amount for however many users you'll have, and if your users increase, then that can go down, but they still charge for their amount. So sometimes, like the dollar amount itself will go up, but the overall cost of that will go down because we have a higher volume. But yeah, well, we would see an increase in that one. Correct. Yeah, we would do, in that case, in those situations, yeah, we would redo it at different rates.
First and a second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. And now we have the authorization for the Pioneer CSC.
So this is one we brought to you guys before. We took it back to them because there was some number of discrepancies on there. It changed the contract on there as well. They did want to increase the medical director portion on it for this first year. And that is due to the fact that obviously when you're building the program and putting that stuff in place, more time will need to be spent. And so they increased the dollar amount associated with the medical director for that. So because of the change in the price, I wanted to bring it back to you guys to be able to look at it and approve it at the new dollar amount.
One is, here it states, we need to have the equipment, for this. Do we already
Yes, we do.
have all the equipment necessary?
We've already done it and it's already been tested.
Then, paragraph 2.9. All right, so how would this work? Could this be used by practitioners as a way of getting their credentials paid for? Now, let me explain that. In paragraph, okay, 2.9, paragraph 2.93, all costs for privileging and credentialing UCSD practitioners will be borne by the hospital. Any cost for privileging and credentialing the UCSD practitioner under this agreement incurred by UCSD shall be reimbursed to UCSD by the hospital. So could this be a way for them to have us pay for their employees to get credentialed?
No, essentially how that process works is anytime that any provider wants to have privileges at our hospital or any hospital for that matter, they have to go through the credentialing process. And it's a pretty lengthy process. There's a lot of work involved in doing that. So there's a cost for us as an organization to go through that process. In certain circumstances, you're allowed to take credential by proxy. And in that case, that would be, we would take the credentials from UCSD because they've already went through that process, and then we would accept them as our own. We're not currently set up to do that, but if we did that, they're saying, well, we want reimbursed because we credentialed them because you didn't take that cost on yourself. And so
these are credentials that we require.
correct. Okay, every hospital will require, and then so it'll go through that process where our team will verify that, yeah, one, they are a doctor, that they are supposed to be doing what they're doing, and they have the education and the background and everything else to do that. And then it'll go to the med staff, and the med staff will look at it. There's a credentialing committee first who approves it, and then from the credentialing committee, it goes to the entire med staff, and the med staff will approve it. And then once it leaves from the med staff, it comes to you guys, and you guys approve it. And that's that final stamp. So when those are what you do with the med staff minutes, and that, because that has all that information on how it's gone through that process to get to this point.
Another question in Exhibit A. So page 21. Hospital agrees that throughout the time period covered in this agreement, hospital will credential additional UCSD critical care providers as UCSD determines necessary to maintain continuous service levels to the hospital. Hospital providers within 60 days request from UCSD. Failure to grant privileges in a timely manner will be expected to limit service response time for emergency UCSD services and will not be contract. So that, I think you answered that question already, but down to below, UCSD fellows, other than the next paragraph here, medical trainees and other levels of care providers will at this time be providing telemedicine services for hospital healthcare providers, current fellowship training, and other providers will be supervised, and cases will be staffed in a faculty member of PCSD. And also, I think that here they mentioned students as well. So we're on the hook for all of their credentials, basically.
Well, it's what it is what we're asking them for is to provide this service. And so in the instance where they're going to provide said service, for tele in particular, it's done by committee, right? So you have multiple providers that do it, and they'll, you may have Dr. X on Friday, Dr. Y on Saturday, and Dr. Z on Sunday, or even a combination of that. Some of them doing 12 hours, and the others doing another 12 hours, or however that might work, however they split that up. All on our end, what we're doing is we're clicking the button and it takes us right to them. And whoever it is that they have on is who they have on. But in order for that person that they have hired to be able to actually provide that service, they do have to be credentialed with this. So their responsibility is to provide the providers. And so like what they're talking about there is if they bring on, so if I'm the one doing it and Carly is, Carol left, so I've got Carly to replace Carol, well then I'm gonna give Pioneers Carly's information, and Pioneers needs to credential her, otherwise she's not gonna be able to provide that service. And then if there is a situation where Carly's on and we need that service, and we go to do that, Carly can't do it because she's not credentialed, that's on us. It's our fault because we didn't timely do that timely enough. And so any instance where we do any type of tele, like a radiology, for example, you'll see them all the time on your credentialing because they go through so many radiologists coming in, and we credential with tons of teleradiologists. And so you'll see them almost all the time on that monthly meeting or on that monthly report that comes through because of how that kind of almost like a revolving door sometimes. And it's our responsibility to credential them in when that happens so that we can make sure that that coverage continues because that's who they're saying they're providing the coverage. And so we have to do our part on our end to make sure that they can provide it to our organization by credentialing.
And yeah, and it's a teaching.
So in their case, it's gonna be, if they've got students or fellows or whoever that's gonna be with them, then that's them saying, look, if it is with them, they're gonna be supervised. So it's not just them by themselves. We're covering them, and that's what they're saying in those statements.
And just for your information, our office did review this one. Like we did have an opportunity to review this one at length, and it's not atypical. None of these are all reasonable provisions that you see in telehealth services agreements.
It is the same one we brought last time. The only difference is with last time, the dollar amounts were all screwed up, and so we verified the dollar amounts and came back because of the dollar amounts.
And then on the telehealth credentialing, like, see if it is on section 2, IVHD acknowledgements and responsibilities. The governing body of IVHD has authorized its medical staff to rely on credentialing decisions of PCS recommending or qualified licensed healthcare provider. So are we agreeing that they're going to set the standard as to what that credentialing is going to be?
Correct. We're basically saying that if it's good enough for UCSD, it's good enough for us.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it's saying. Like if they're saying that they can practice there with UCSD, then we're saying we're okay with them practicing here. We accept those same standards.
Paragraph section 2, paragraph 2.6 here, IVHD expressly acknowledges that this agreement is only applicable to practitioners. IVHD acknowledges that while UCSD residents, interns, medical students, and other students, including graduate fellows, may participate in telemedicine consultations at IVHD, this agreement does not apply to their participation. IVHD further acknowledges that UCSD that health medical staff and are not members of UCSD health medical staff. Are they still liable? My big question is, are they still liable if
Yes.
one of them do it?
Well, and yeah, and so in those situations, like I said, that's why I talked about before how they're supervised, and it's more along the lines of most of the time when it's something like that, it's going to be same kind of thing. If it's Carol and I'm the actual physician and she's the student, well, Carol may be with me on there, and I'm going through the process, and then I'm having conversations with her as I'm going through that process to help her understand. It's from a student perspective, it's not a situation where it's going to be Carol doing it and Carol saying this is what he said. Yeah, it would go through the provider, that one who's actually privileged. Yep. Yeah, of course.
Questions? Comments? If not, I would once again entertain
I think the second.
We have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item, which is our strategic planning session regarding the collective health plan.
So there'll be a tag team effort here, but essentially we kind of talked a little bit about last time to prep you guys that it's coming. We've had some conversations about that space in particular. Dr. Tyson has been briefed on it as well, as far as it's going to come to this board for a decision on what we want to do. But the recommendation that's coming from us is that south side of the building. we would recommend that remains with IVHD and not given to Tyson to do as he sees fit with that. So that, I mean, because we want to be able to provide those services as IVHD and not do them through the urgent care. In doing that, that would mean we would have to make an adjustment to his agreement and understanding that he's only taking that north side of the building, make an adjustment to do it by square footage and charge him just for the rent of that side instead of the rent for the whole thing, because originally, if he has both sides, he would have to pay rent for that whole thing. So we would adjust that to by the square footage to say that that's what he's gonna, his rent will be going forward. And he's got one more month on that free rent, correct? So we need that's why we wanna have that discussion, have the board make that decision so that we can properly charge him for the rent associated with that. Even if we did, we're still running into some of the issues with the city as far as getting that south side cleared anyways. So we would be charging him for that. And we would probably need to do something similar to this. But our recommendation to the board is that we want to retain that south side of the building to be able to be used for IVHD purposes to expand services in that area. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
I just wanted to clarify with Chris that about 2,400 plus or minus a few feet is the side that he's on. And the bigger building is the one on the south side, which is about 4,600 square feet. So you have an idea of the size. So by proportional allocation, we could just, either we stick to the same dollar amount and just apply it to the square feet. And that'll probably be the easiest to digest from his side.
Yeah, what I recall, the rent was pretty generous.
Yes.
That would be something, I don't know if Adriana, you would want to look at that from you guys' perspective, just for fair market value, make sure that we're not undercharging on that as well, for him to utilize that. But that would be something we probably would want to.
For sure, to the extent moving forward, we have the ability to set price. It's got to be fair market value, just under the healthcare district law to avoid gift to public funds issues. To the extent we're looking backwards at current rent, if it's now under fair market value, but it's the contract price, that's just the cost of doing business. Same if it were overvalued, undervalued, the contract says what the contract says. So we're beholden to the contract until and unless we renegotiate and execute an amendment.
And it being commercial, we're not capped on the rate. That's to the amount that we can increase the rent, right? So when we renegotiate, we can just come right back, no matter how much we're increasing, we go to fair market value.
Yeah, and you can put a premium on it. You don't have to charge fair market value. You can charge more than that. You just, the standards under the healthcare law, and it's mostly for acquisitions, less so for rent, but the expectation to avoid gift of public funds issues is you got to charge at least fair market value. Yeah, unless there's something else you're getting. Like if there's some other value that aligns with, your strategic plan or, goals of the district or whatever, then that's a basis to maybe charge less than fair market value sometimes if you can quantify those intangibles, but otherwise that's your baseline.
And to give you an idea, just so we can compare it, the square footage that he's paying, the price per square foot is about $1 a square foot. $1 and $0.06 or this, it was like $1 something. I forget what the amount is, but just to give you an idea, when I was at El Centro, for the rural health clinic that El Centro uses, it was $2 and change per square foot. At least $2.40, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe $2.40. Yeah.
Can I get the other things?
I do agree with you.
Here is a strategic plan, so you just.
Correct. We need direction from the board to tell us that that's, you want to go that direction, retain the south side. And then in so doing, that means we would have to adjust is based off of that.
We'd have to come back with an amendment.
Yeah.
I personally like, on that is, I would like IVHD to have something that was money under
technically do, because we have a
Yeah,
clinic
we
there.
already have it.
We have the rural health clinic that's IVHD now, and then we have that as well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And that would be, for us, one of the things we're looking at is, as far as that space is concerned, is, obviously, I think the pharmacy is gonna be a big piece of that. We wanna make sure that we can do that, as IVHD. That would be good for us to have that community. He technically can't do that. That's the other piece of that. He can't do that as a doctor. He can't own it, so he would still have to, right, to make that happen. So that one is kind of like interesting. The other part of it is with the, right now it's kind of set up to be able to do imaging. The floor is already set up, and the rooms are already set up with lead lining and everything like that. I think one of the things that we'll be looking at in the future for that as well is potentially more of that outpatient imaging and what that looks like. That area in particular, it's really difficult outside of, a standard x-ray, which he can do in his own office as well. And we can do in some of the other offices there. The other thing, CT, ultrasounds, that stuff, you can't, you have to come all the way up this direction to do that. And so being able to provide that service down there would also be great for that community, and there's no reason why we can't do that.
I think a motion is better. You can just give direction because it's not,
Do we have to bring it back?
yeah, you have to bring back an amendment, yeah, so you're not approving anything in particular.
Giving us the direction, giving us that we can
Yeah.
go that, the board is okay with that direction, so we can move that way.
If you're comfortable with consensus and there's no one speaking in opposition, you're fine with just giving him that direction. You don't have to articulate a particular motion.
Are we fine with the consensus that we were trying to pursue that direction and bring back the actual amendment to the contract?
Okay, perfect. Yep, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now, management reports?
One item for our next board meeting. We have a grant writer and there's a new grant that we're going to start working on. That we would apply in the summer, but it's on a new access point grant. We would give about $600,000 in the first year. Basically, this is to open clinics for the access. We're waiting for more information on where it's have to be located. Does it have to be rural or anywhere? We are looking at that.
A quick question, I'm sorry, I just want to point out, I'm curious, could that apply to the south side of that building, because it is a new access point, it would be lab
Well,
imaging
that's
center?
Yeah, that's what I'm waiting to hear, if it depends on location, because some of them have to be rural, so like even, what it was rural, so we're waiting to get
It has yeah, it's not rules.
that. So it depends on. Yeah, I think that's.
Down to our hospital operations.
Report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
How is the quality? I think you already have the concept down at the dashboard.
The dashboard.
That makes it easy for us to see what's happening. So
The one thing I will mention, just because the presentation kind of was a little bit about an employee engagement survey. So it's in there that we completed one, we administered it in March. We did have our response rate of 74%, which was short of our goal, but it's still really good because beta requires a 61 to 68% or higher. We just this week received our organizational results and then department specific results. So at the next board meeting, I'll present that to you, and either Chris or I will share.
questions?
Question out of curiosity, do we have a vascular surgeon here? I thought the value in that. I still had the CEO, Scott Goddard.
I don't, oh, here, on what page were you?
The first page, vascular surgery.
Oh, those are ones that were transferred.
Transfer out.
Yeah, he actually offered it like that.
Yeah, I don't believe that Dr. Tapas is becomes one-time a lot. He's
Yeah.
not a full-time.
He just sees them, he just.
Yeah, he didn't.
That was
No.
Yeah, no. This kind of shows us what we transferred out. What we're looking forward to as far as what we're gonna need.
Exactly.
So that's why I look forward to it, so.
So I will, to that extent, just as a precursor or preview, let you guys know that we're working on teleneurology right now as well. So, yeah, we went through a couple of different folks to give us some bits on what that would look like. And so you guys will see that in the next probably month or so, coming to the board to for approval on that as well. So kind of see that that's one of our areas, but we want to be able to do that. One of the things that we did talk to them about, which is kind of big for us, not to steal Carol's thunder or anything on this, but I do want to make sure you're aware it's coming down the pipe, but that could lead to us being able to get our stroke designation for our ER. So, and the two of the groups in particular said that they can help us with that. The third probably will as well, but the two of them for sure would work with us on getting that designation. So.
And that's similar to what I was we have the people on the doctors that are there and they're actually online
Yes.
with the cameras all set up so that they're interviewing the patients.
Yes.
Making decisions and counseling the family and all of that for the stroke.
Yep.
If we could be within that window of time.
Correct.
Not that I want to micromanage, I'm sorry, but I just have to know.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
You want to show them how to do it?
No, I mean, those are good questions because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, no, that's exciting, not good. So I look forward to hearing more on that, so. I believe that Carmen, did you have anything other
Yes.
than the presentation that we already had?
No, I did put a report in the packet. If you guys have questions, let me know. I did want to take note, page 6 of for the centralized scheduling. We've been working a lot over the last couple of months for the centralized scheduling, really trying to identify, we've had some deficiencies and issues with calls and referrals and authorizations and quite a bit of a backlog since we moved into Cerner. So we've been really working and trying to identify those key issues and trying to streamline it. So there's 2 different reports in Cerner. This is one that we have found to be the most consistent, but we have identified this week that the mapping is not accurate in this report, as well as far as the providers when you're looking at what's being sent out. So we'll be working on that the next month and I'll identify those issues and bring it back.
No, we covered it.
Yeah, just to give you guys a couple quick updates. We did have that HR consultant start since the last board meeting we had, and that's going really well right now. And they're also going to be helping us with some of the stuff with our transition, with wage, salary, and our salary scales, and as well as like benefits and stuff like that as we work with ECRMC. So they'll help us with those. I do want to give you guys a heads up too. We've talked about this before, but one of the biggest pieces that we're going to need from our seismic perspective is a master plan. And so Adriana and Emma are going to be drafting an RFP for us to be able to put out to start that process. Just to kind of give you an idea, you know, get that request for proposal here in like the next 2 weeks, for example, just to kind of give you timelines, then we put that out. If we could get those bids back in and make a decision by like the end of May, as an example, then it would probably be September before they would finalize, because it takes a few months for that whole process to play out. We would be looking to get advice from them as far as what that dollar amount looks like to take care of pioneers. But moreover, one of the pieces that we're doing is we're actually going to craft the RFP for the master plan to include more than just pioneers. So it'll take into consideration buildings and such that ECRMC has, and how strategically some of those spaces would be utilized and what that would mean. And so we'll have a couple of different options on the table. Everything goes well, the merger goes through, here's an option for us to be able to do and utilize space. And with the idea of trying to do the most cost-effective method here for pioneers. If it doesn't go through, for example, there'll be like another option for here's what it would take with the space that we have, with the people that we have. So you'll see that come through here in the next little bit when we get the bids in for the RFP. I anticipate that those are probably going to be, $250,000, $300,000 to have that on the low end. Probably a little higher than that potentially. So that stuff will be coming to the board. So just giving you the heads up that it's going to be on its way. And as we go through that process, we'll keep you posted on that. And then just so that you guys are aware, we did have a meeting with some local providers. I was part of that, and Pablo was there, and Katie was there as well. We were invited to come to that meeting with a handful of the local providers, and they had a number of questions for us about things that were going on, direction and so forth. And so we answered a lot of their questions, and I think all of us walked away from that meeting, and that was last Monday. We all walked away from that meeting feeling pretty good about that situation. I know that the providers that were there expressed appreciation for that, and getting that, some things that were worried about and the anxieties that they had, and we increased those quite a bit through that conversation. So we'll continue to keep those doors open and have that kind of conversation as we move forward. But just make you guys aware that we have had some of those local conversations with providers here recently. And then on that, well, right along with that, where we've had the changeover, I guess I'll steal a little bit of thunder from Adriana on this, but we do have a number of work groups that are happening in the background with relation to the ECRMC merger. I won't go into too much detail. I'll introduce some of that, but I will go into detail about the group that Pablo and I are working right now. So first of all, we met as a group. So their executive team, our executive team, we all sat down, we all wrote bread together, and just kind of had a little, get to know you meeting, and got to hear about each other's backgrounds, some of the things that they do for fun, that kind of stuff, just so we could all know each other a little bit better. And then of course it turned into a couple conversations about what we have, what they have, and some of those synergies that we could be looking at. From there, Pablo and I met, we put together a list of subcommittees that will be on. IT is one of them. Cerner group is another one. The clinics is another one. We have finance, and to that extent HR and those pieces. And so I met with each one of those groups this week and kind of said, here's what we want you guys to do, here's the data we want to put together, what we're looking for from that perspective. So like our clinics, for example, they're going to bring us back data for the last 3 years on each of the clinics, so we can see how they're trending, what are their numbers. Does it make sense if we have this clinic and they have that clinic, and the numbers make sense if we actually bring it together? Then that would be the recommendation on a strategic plan together. just so we can get a feel for where all those numbers are at. Same thing on the IT side, right? There's so many different systems that we utilize. VMware we just talked about, that is like one of probably 50. And they have the same thing. So we're matching those things up, matching contracts, times, dollar amounts, and then asking them in their opinions, working together, like if we move, as we move forward, what is their recommendation to move to? And so they'll put all that together. So the first rounds happened this last week. In 2 weeks, each of those groups are going to meet again, and we're going to get more data. They'll have opportunity to do run their numbers, run the data and so forth. So that's happening right now on that end. So we're working together to make sure that stuff happens to that end. The plan is on the 8th of May that Pablo and I in our board meeting would do a presentation, a strategic presentation for the community, for this board, just to give everybody an understanding of where we're at in this process, what the process looks like, some of the things that we're moving towards, helping the community understand that this process is significantly different than the process of the dissolution of pioneers. Some of the timeframes are vastly different, and some of the work will be the same, but now we have the luxury of a runway for some of those things that we didn't have with pioneers. And so the plan is to have a presentation for you guys and for the community on the 8th of May, to help answer some of those questions. Just an idea of the direction. So that's the big report. I will just say, just in the way of Chow, the Chow's moving forward. We've got a lot that's happened there. We've got some good news from the DEA. Furthermore, the Board of Pharmacy for the state of California approved our license there, so they're like the first ones.
Yeah.
Which is like crazy.
Yeah.
So we'll get that, and with that change in the name and everything, we'll actually be able to change the DEA as well. But the other stuff is in progress. Some of them are moving along a little bit better than others. Even on the RHC side, the one that actually is moving quicker is the Calexico one, oddly enough, which is also like we're kind of baffled by. But the other, I think, is a typo error on there, or a clerical error on their end, and they want us to put in a ticket to fix their clerical error. So yeah, there's a lot of that. All that stuff's moving along. The team's done a phenomenal job with gathering all the paperwork and working through that. And from my perspective, I just want to make sure that this board knows and understands the amount of work that these ladies here are putting in, Letty's putting in as well. Tomas as well is putting in a ton of work, and in our team here, all the directors and other people that are getting all the data, putting all this stuff together. Like there's a lot of stuff happening on the back end. And we're getting it done, timely, and we're still taking care of what we need to here at the hospital. I just can't say, thank you enough to these folks, these ladies, and the work that they're doing day in and day out to make all that happen. Because it truly is phenomenal work that they're doing at the hospital.
Chris, I got a question, Chris.
Yeah.
Would you happen to know when Pablo's contract expires?
I don't know for sure. I believe that it is in March, I think is when he came that night. My understanding it was a 4-year. So
2026?
So 27, I think. So I think that's what it would be. But I don't know that.
And then I have another question. In regards to like, once we do the merger, maybe it's premature right now, but at some point, are we going to be provided with like a new org chart or like different ideas of how, when they structure it, so that we can decide on them? That
would be part of what would be presented as well, is the org chart.
At this May?
Ideally, yes. But that would be part of that process for sure. I mean, that's how I would envision it. I know that there's been a little bit of discussion on that in some of our meetings as far as UCSD, Patty Mason, and those folks being part of these conversations. So there's been conversations there about who was actually responsible for the org chart, how that should look. So, I don't know that answer 100%, but ideally that would be presented at that time as well, because you guys should have say in that.
On the challenge process, is there anything that's lagging behind that we're kind of at risk potential?
There's a lot of stuff that technically is at risk. I would say that the biggest stuff at this point in time, the DEA was one of the big ones, and so we got over that hurdle, so I'm pretty happy about that. The other really big one is Cerner, in my mind. That has the potential, if we don't have it done timely, we're going to be in a situation when that does play out that we'll be without pay for a time. Because of how the changing all that stuff over, stuff having to wait to be filled out, stuff coming in, it has to go through a different process. And so we would be potentially without pay from some of those providers for a time. I think we're anticipating could be up to 3 months in some cases. The problem is that if we can't get Cerner to work with us quick enough on that, then again, the same process will have to happen with ECRMC, and then we could find ourselves in a situation where we're still in it, and now ECRMC is in it, which is like a terrible spot to be in. Like, we need to be done with it so that we're getting the money in as ECRMC goes into it, so that we're both not missing reimbursements at that point in time. So that to me is probably one of our biggest concerns that I think most of us have, is just that process with Cerner. Some of the other stuff is kind of minor in comparison, but the other big issue that I think that we have that is a concern is just with the RHCs. There's still, as the process is moving forward, there's still a lot of unknowns as far as what will happen with the RHC status, in particular in Calexico. It seems at this point in time, we haven't seen anything change for Raleigh, so we're probably going to be okay here. But Calexico in particular, we could lose that designation, and we have to try, we're anticipating that and working on alternate routes to get a waiver for us to be able to retain that because of the circumstances regarding the so that's another one that is kind of up there on that list. But those two, I would say, out of all the other stuff, the other things will happen. It's just a matter of timing, but those things could have more of an impact than others.
Chris,
yes.
Going back to my topic about the sport chart. So is UCSD in the opinion that they're going to pick the CEO for us when we do the merger? I mean, are they thinking like it's their decision? Because we're the board, we're going to decide who the CEO is, not them. And the C-suite, that's going to be our decision, not UCSD. You guys don't work for UCSD. I'm not in the opinion that they're going to make the decisions for stuff like that.
So it is in a general rule, anytime you do like a management agreement or a JPA or anything like that, that is typically something that you will find as part of that.
But the JPA that was signed before we were even involved,
right?
Correct. That JPA was between the city and them.
Correct.
So we would either inherit that JPA, which says that UCSD is the manager and responsible for the. There's no one on the Zoom anymore. It's just me and Brenda, and responsible for, and that the UCSD can select the CEO and can elect whether that CEO will be a UCSD employee or not. So that already exists. So to the extent we would assume those obligations as part of the merger, then we've got 3.5 years left under those provisions, and those provisions of that JPA are not great. There's a couple kind of issues with it that we had that our smaller group had. We are in the process of negotiating a different JPA with UCSD for consideration by this board, which would similarly appoint UCSD as the manager and allow UCSD to decide whether or not it wants to employ the CEO, CFO, and COO. And they could be IVHD employees or UCSD employees, but they would pick them. And we would, this is a difference between the proposed JPA language and the existing JPA language, but we would have folks from IVHD involved in the hiring process, like in the interview process. So we'd have a seat at the table, but the decision that the board would be making that is similar to, you know, hiring your CEO would be, are you gonna hire a manager or not? That's your big decision. So you
don't have to accept the change. Either
you have to accept the city, ECRMC, UCSC, JPA if you want the merger to go through under the current term sheet, because it's a contract that they've agreed to. And unless the parties agree to, you know, like you can always agree mutually to walk away from the contract.
Right.
If they agree, if UCSC says, sure, we'll walk away from the JPA.
The issue
Then-
with that one is that it's also, it would be with just CCRMC because of how it's set. And so it would be very difficult in any scenario if you're bringing anybody for the JPA or for a management agreement under a situation like ours to say, well, you just take that building and this one's gonna operate differently, right? So that's where the issue resides. And to Adriana's point, like the one that exists is not, nobody likes it. And so the option is to redo it so that it is something that would be something that we would be okay with as we move forward. Those will be pieces that are going to be in there because that's going to be something for, like I said, any group that's going to come in and do that from a management standpoint or a JPA standpoint is going to say, we want that right to be able to hire that person. Like, we'll bring the board in, right? Like she said, you'll have opportunities to be able to sit in and do that, but realistically, that right, like you could all say one thing, but if we wanted something else, that's what it's going to be. And then, because you're going to want that in that kind of scenario. Like if you're going to say, I'm taking responsibility, then you want to make sure you're bringing on your people. To that end, you know, and that's part of the conversation that we have had in that meeting. Or in that committee to discuss that. To that end, there's this situation obviously is a little bit different, but to that end, if, for example, you have that JPA in place and then they select a CEO. A CEO that they select should inherently be able to choose their team as well. It's because it's their team, right? Obviously, part of that should, you know, having this conversation, kind of reading the room or whatever it might be, but it's got to be that their team is their team as they do that, right? And so it's hard to not do that and think that you can accomplish what it is that you're supposed to do. But I think that that's what you're going to find in any of those situations. If we have, even if it's not UCSD, right? Even if it was like tenant or, you know, somebody else that we had coming on to do that management agreement, it would have something similar to that in that situation. I have not seen one that doesn't, because they want to make sure that you're telling me as that organization that has the ability or that is taking responsibility for the management side of it, that I have to take responsibility for that. Well, then I want to make sure that I have the right person in place to do that. And but like Adriana said, it's important that we put in there as well that the board has that ability to sit on that and be able to say, here's what we like, here's what we don't like.
Yeah, and your big decision point, I mean, if you look at a normal org chart, it's like this, right? It's board, you know, CEO, and all the people, and then there's like legal, maybe sometimes compliance, right? So this is your big decision, CEO. So instead of CEO, manager.
Right.
And all this, the CEO is deciding all this. So the manager would be deciding all this. And this is where, you know, it's almost more beneficial in a way through the joint powers agreement if it moves forward in the way that we hope it will, because there are promises and safeguards in place insurances and stuff that doesn't exist with an individual, with a person. If you were hiring a CEO, then it's all on you and the CEO. But you have the ability to hire, fire a CEO. You have the ability to bring on and terminate a manager, even though the term, it's not too unlike many CEOs have 5-year contracts. This would be a 5-year contract for UCSD.
So, but under that current JPA, if we go with it, we don't have control of us. We want to achieve better quality healthcare, and the CEO is not providing it, then we don't have the option of replacing that CEO with somebody that we want. It would be, we're getting rid of the CEO, but then UCSD is gonna select the next one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I take exception to that because then you have these other employees here that they are gonna have a say on whether they stay
Right.
employed or not. And to me, that doesn't sit well with me. And
I mean, that's,
I feel like UCSD, I mean, they've been helpful in what we're doing, but I feel like UCSD wants to be in charge of our district by this. To me, this is very, very key. It's like replacing the commander in a submarine. If you don't pick the right person, I want to be that person that selects the right person, us, not the submarine commander from another ship, you know what I'm saying? And to me, to safeguard your guys' positions and to allow, and for us to allow UCSD to come in, make this decision on their own. I mean, I guess we'll get to it when we get to it, but just know that I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, that's a good, I mean, that's fair, and that's a good discussion for the strategic planning session. So kind of bleeding into my report, as Chris mentioned, 2 sort of midterm goals that the working group has set is presentation and discussion regarding a proposed organizational chart of the combined hospital system, which the target date for that was the next board meeting for August 24. But we have to wait and see. I mean, UCSD does want input on that. April 24. Yeah, April 24, sorry. And then May 8th would be the joint CEO presentation, Chris and Pablo together, presenting on the strategic plan and vision of the deal and walking through, for the benefit of the board, but also for the benefit of the public, just how much more complicated this deal is than the Pioneers succession. Because folks might say, well, IVHD stepped in and took over PMH and it's still running and just do the same thing with ECRMC. It's like, no, this is a very different deal. There is no LAFCO or succession or successor agency by operation of law that has been saving us on many of these regulatory issues. So kind of walking through that, and these are all good questions to pepper the CEOs with. And you have to imagine that what you're experiencing right now is probably what the Pioneers board was experiencing, thinking about IVHD's board stepping in and saying, well, what if they're going to step in with Chris? What if they wipe out our C-suite? We love these ladies. We love, you know, and so now we're having that same sort of anxiety with, well, UCSD comes on board and they're the Chris, right? What if they wipe out all our great folks?
Yeah, but the difference is we're a board and they were a board where you have an entity providing the staff, we're the board. So
it is a very difficult.
As long as when you have communications with them, I mean, whatever, but just know that I'm gonna be fighting tooth and nail for you guys to stay on board and not give them something that they don't deserve to have, especially with our people from here. That's just.
And that was my question. I know in AB 918 it says all contracts, liabilities, you know, everything goes over into from each hospital.
No.
But we also have a choice to terminate those contracts.
Yeah, but that's only Pioneers too. That's only we assume the contracts, liabilities of Pioneers, not ECRMC. What we assume in ECRMC is set by the purchase agreement. So the purchase agreement, when it comes before this board, which we haven't gotten a draft yet, but will say how employees are handled. And the really tricky part is, Chris and I have had this conversation many times now, which is like, this is IVHD absorbing ECRMC.
Exactly.
This is not UCSD absorbing IVHD. And so,
But that's the impression.
well, some folks might have that impression. Other folks do not have that impression. And so it's a matter of messaging, communication. I truly think it's a conflict to have them have their
to be our choice.
Well, I think it was like that for a while, from what I understand, this predates us. And as the manager, they were dissatisfied with performance and had no ability to do anything about it because the board had their guy, or, you know, like, I mean, that's kind of front, I don't know, I wasn't there. But, and so that's why they pushed hard for the ability to operate and hire, fire the CEO. And, you know, the JPA, which we've looked at extensively, and at some point will come before this board when we feel it's ready, is different than the current one in that it allows for this board to participate in that hiring and firing.
UCSD have 10 years to do something great.
Could I offer something? If they fought that
Do you
hard.
want to state your name?
State my name, my foot, so I'm wearing pepper spray. I drag her over here, she drags me over. What it is. We go home together.
I'm watching the time.
Here's what I'm gonna say. If UCSD fought hard for that, they wanted that, they're not gonna give it up. You'll have all the responsibility, but you know, the mechanisms to make it happen.
I mean, yeah, and we're on board. You know, our recommendations coming into some of these joint sessions, and UCSD has been on board entirely with, we need to start talking to the public. We need to start our messaging here. And because this deal is so complicated, it's difficult to do. You don't want to do it too early. You don't want to roll out something half-baked. But that's why we set these goals of April 24th and May 8th, or whenever the next meeting is. Yeah.
As part of this, wasn't CSD also going to make a presentation to the public as to what they would be able to do for the district?
Yes, and you know, there's also in the joint powers agreement, that's something that would happen, that's part of the May 8th presentation. But also, you know, part of an edit that we incorporated into the draft JPA is a strategic plan presentation by UCSD to this board that we get to hold their feet to the fire. If you're not meeting the goals or timing of the strategic plan, then what are you doing? You know, and press.
Plus, if you guys are going to vote on a JPA, you should be able to see what it is. Right, exactly. But I mean, for you guys to make that decision, and that would be how any of them would set it up. Like, as far as going in, you would request that from any group to be able to say, well, show us what you're going to do, and then they would sit down and spell it out, and then you guys would make a decision. And that's part of it.
That was my very first topic on the questions. Might have pros and cons, but on the very top of it, it says, what is your strategic?
And I don't
maybe I don't want to accept it.
I think that to be fair, because I know this is a very hot topic, it's something that's very personal to myself as well, but to that extent, I'll just go back to the fact that, you know, it wasn't like up until a month ago, like, we weren't even sure that this deal was even going to happen, right? So I think that I think they would say the same thing. I think they would say that they didn't necessarily, as far as ECRMC is concerned, I don't think they would say that they knew what was happening or not either. And so we're literally, you know, 4 weeks or so into this, where all that stuff does have to play out for, you know, ECRMC has to do their part, UCSD has to do their part, and we have to do our part, and bring all of those things together. It's a lot of moving parts. And so I think in time some of those answers will come, and then you guys will have that opportunity. You'll have what you need for your due diligence at that point. But I would just, even though it is a very touchy situation, I think that, you know, with all the stuff that has to happen and all the moving parts, we gotta allow people the time to put the stuff together so that you can see that and be able to make those decisions. It's a lot.
So
It
it's
is a
another
lot.
discussion.
Yeah, it's appropriate for a future board meeting, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
because we're actually starting to comment on a report that's not an action actionable item at this time. And if I'm hearing correctly, we're gonna have additional information coming up at other meetings, but before I get there, I don't wanna cut Adriana off. Do you have more for your report?
I do not, there is no further report.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, items for future agenda, are we getting something at our next meeting as far as the org chart, or are we going all of it is May 8th?
TBD. Ideally, April 24 would include a discussion about a potential org chart, and it wouldn't be for approval. It's just for discussion because it would be about the combined healthcare system. But if not April 24, then May 8 is the target date for the joint presentation by CEOs, and that would include certainly the org chart strategic vision. So.
And then we're still okay this month on the 24th.
Yes.
Because it's May.
It's the May,
we'll
yep.
have to change that.
And we have, yeah, and then we'll have a probably a lengthy closed session at the 24th.
Okay. So, future items for discussion, I'm sure Casey and Adriana will work on our agenda. Our next meeting is on April the 24th. And I don't have my little number, just. I don't have my little chart, but can somebody please tell me where the meeting is going to be?
So it's supposed to be, yeah, at El Centro City Hall.
Okay, because I want everyone to just, yeah. Where it's at.
Yeah, we can do that.
Oh, good idea.
Just want
Yeah, we
to
have
change
the,
where the locations.
yeah.
Yes, I will change it.
Yeah, because amazingly enough, we seem to get confused.
Mhm.
And we went all going to Glasgow last
Show me.
time, so.
In my email, I did say friendly reminder.
You did, and thank you very much, but that is a very, that's never just said, that was a good suggestion to put it. Hey,
You only gets one a month. We're gonna have to remember that when you're in India.
Well, and I'll also note that you were prepared, because you were asking. So with that, we do have a closed session item on our agenda. So, we're gonna go ahead and move into closed session, so thank you very much. And I agree with that. I think Adriana reported out.
Yes, I reported out.
We have
I sent her the minutes, I sent her the report.
Okay. All right, so no further anything else. We already discussed the meeting in El Centro. I don't have a little gavel, but we're adjourned.
Right, baby?